live, and then I'll take it from there.
You are live. You're good to go whenever.
All right, thank you very much. We're live. We'll go ahead and get the agenda up there. All right, good evening, everyone. We're now live, and thank you and welcome to the December 16th Planning Commission meeting. And we will now go into our agenda for tonight, which is going to be short on items, but long on time for what the items actually are. So let's go ahead and start with the minutes we have. They were sent out by Kim a few days ago for the December 2nd meeting. Hopefully you've had a minute to look at those. If not, I can represent those for you commissioners as you need. But before we even get to that, I'm going to display the actual agenda and we'll go ahead and approve that. So here comes the display. There it is. Pretty simple. I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda as written.
Second.
There's been a second. Any further discussion? None heard. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion passes unanimously. The agenda is approved as written with the items of going over the minutes and approving those, and then finally the public hearing where we will listen to the plan development for preliminary subdivision application by the National Lutheran Communities and Services, who is the developer. All right, we'll move on to the minutes. I'll display those for you.
Ben, since I didn't attend the December 2nd meeting, I won't be voting on the minutes.
Okay, good to know. And hopefully you had a chance to look at the the video of that. It's some good stuff because we've continued some items from that meeting. Then we will hear that later. So definitely need to take a look at that if you get a chance. And there's the minutes. And we have Diane Butler being listed as present there. Probably want to remove that.
Thank you.
Do you have the latest comments that Bob had included?
Yes.
Yeah,
Included.
okay.
I move to approve.
Okay, there's a motion to approve. I'll second that motion with the changes that Bob said in. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Butler, thank you. The minutes pass, and please make sure that slight amendment is there and Mr. Waldman's comments are properly included. Stop that share. Okay, next item on the agenda is going into the public hearings, and this will be the first public hearing of many, most likely 3, possibly 4. We don't know. Going into the plan development. You see down here public hearings. Now we're sharing it on the screen for preliminary subdivision application, and it's going to be with a lot of people joining in there. You can read that. I'm not going to read that out. And it's going to be development of an institution for the care of the aged known as the Village of Providence Point on property located at the intersection of Forest Drive and Spa Road. And this public hearing will be held open until January 6th. And then we should have one follow on after that. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, staff, but the January 6th hearing is going to be an in-person hearing for participation of testimony by the public. Is that correct?
No, sir, it remains a virtual hearing.
Remains virtual. How about the third hearing?
Also virtual.
Also virtual. So no in-person at all due to Omicron and other issues, right?
Correct.
Okay, I want to make that clear to the public. We did try to do that, but it came down to a lot of issues for the public and ourselves. So it's going to remain virtual, But yet, even though virtual, we are going to get everyone in that wants to comment that we can. So please, members of the public that are listening now, make note. And what you see here, you can review again and tell other people to go and review the YouTube recording. And they can also submit application to testify at the next meeting in 2 weeks, January 6th. And that can be online virtually here. It doesn't have to be where you show your face. It can be where you just phone it in, or you can go through your computer and show your face as well while you testify. Easiest is just to dial in, and you get a link sent from the city, and it'll allow you to get into the meeting. And if you have trouble, please email the Planning and Zoning Department beforehand. Thank you very much. Okay, now moving into this public hearing, any other questions from staff or the commissioners before we hear the staff's intro to presentation? Okay, thank you. Well, staff, could you please go into your little introduction before we do anything further?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the commission, for the record, my name is Thomas Smith. I'm the Chief of Current Planning for the City of Annapolis. As always, it's my pleasure to speak before you, but actually more so in this case, because you're about to receive a presentation for a project that's been in the works for more than 10 years. This application plan development 2019-001 is for a special mix plan development and preliminary subdivision by National Lutheran Communities and Services for approval of a 350 unit bed institution for the care of the aged, known as the Village of Providence Point. The concept anticipated here is that of a continuing care retirement community certified by the Maryland Department of Aging. Or as you iterated, Mr. Chairman, over the next 3 planning commission meetings, you're going to hear a testimony as a joint presentation between the city and the applicant. As with review of this project, the presentation is also going to be a collaborative and iterative process that we've done all along with this development project. The development of Crystal Springs Farm and Masquet Farm really begins at the state level, frankly. It's strongly rooted in smart growth and enforced conservation. As the state capital, Annapolis is nationally recognized for its influences in this area. As such, the city continually sets the highest standards for preservation, sustainability, and design. In Annapolis, the planning department is not only charged with plan review, it's charged with design review, and there's a significant difference in those. The planning director recently stated to me that he appreciated staff and I sticking to our vision for this project. I really wish we could take the credit for that, but the credit truly belongs to the owner, Ms. Richardson Pearson, who purchased the 2 farms in 1995 and 1996, saving them from a massive 675 unit development. Also to Mr. Lawrence Bradshaw of National Lutheran, who not once, twice, not 20 times, but every time there was a revision to the plan, he did so and supported the goal to achieve the highest standards in sustainability. And let's be clear, National Lutheran is not a developer, thus they don't act like one. Also, the numerous members of the community, none more so than former Senator Gerald Weingrad, who not only provided their expertise, but participated tirelessly over many, many years. Oftentimes, the large scale, these community impacted projects that are brought before the Planning Commission are primarily those categorized as redevelopment. In other words, we're modifying the built environment, such as Acton's Landing or Park Place or even Inner West Street. And frankly, the city's good at it. The Village of Providence Point is a project which inserts the built environment into a natural environment. And prior to the Village of Providence Point, the largest single contribution to land conservation was within the Kingsport project. That project is 101 acres and dedicated approximately 50 acres, half of its land, to permanent conservation. It was also one of the first projects some 25 years prior to being codified for no net loss forest conservation. But here, of the 175 acres in the Village of Providence Point, approximately 145 acres, or 82% of the property, will be dedicated in some form of permanent conservation, and it's truly unprecedented for the city of Annapolis. I hope the commission will appreciate the many years, frankly, thousands of staff hours, numerous people, groups, organizations who participated in the creation of what we believe is a healthy project, a people project, a project of sound design, and a project that surely Annapolis is most sustainable to date. As we move through the presentations over the next 3 nights, I further hope the commission will understand the commitment to detail. For example, such as views from all points to the forest, the definition of space, the relationships of scale, the hierarchy and street arrangement, and certainly the magnitude of detailed preservation, connectiveness both internally and externally, and most especially the formation of identity. The quote from Winston Churchill, who said, "First we must shape our buildings and then they shape us." And I believe this is true for the overall landscape. This iterative process I talked about in joint presentation is going to be with the applicant, whose legal counsel is Alan Hyatt, and he's going to call each witness, and then the staff is going to follow each of those witnesses with our testimony. So I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Hyatt.
I've got one quick question for staff before we turn over to Mr. Hyatt from the chairman here. I just want it to be known by the members of the public why this application or how it gets to us at this point versus a few years ago. Now, as the application's written, would it have come to us 4 years ago prior to legislation on major developments? Because people have asked that question, so I'm just trying to make it open for the public here on the recording.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it would have. This is a plan development and subdivision application, and they have always come before the Planning Commission.
Thank you very much. There's been some emails bouncing around of people that didn't understand that quite so. So now that they've heard it from you, the goose is gander, they'll feel a little bit more comfortable. Thank you.
Certainly.
And this, as you've said, this is another variant of continued development attempts at this property and mitigation by the city and the applicants. So a lot of work involved for the public, and hence we're seeing this again now. So thank you very much. And we'll go ahead on to I have no problems going on to Mr. Hyatt. Thank you from the staff. But well, one last question. We always give the commissioners a chance to ask staff anything before we proceed on. Commissioners, do you have anything you want to ask with staff before we proceed on with the presentation? All right, good. Then we've done our bit and we're ready to hear what the presentation is. Thank you.
Could you stop your screen share, Ben?
Sure will.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I'm Alan Hyatt, located at 200 Westgate Circle. I'm here tonight representing National Lutheran Communities and Services, along with its entity, the Village at Providence Point, Inc. My office submitted an application on behalf of these entities as well as the property owners. And the property owners, as Mr. Smith indicated, are largely entities that are controlled by Janet Richardson Pearson. We're here for several requests, and I think this is a bit of a follow-up to your statement. The applicant is seeking a planned development approval, and that's determined by the Planning Commission. But we're also seeking approval of a preliminary plat, and there are variances under the Forest Conservation Act that this body, the Planning Commission, decides on. So this will be part of our overall presentation. The property in question, and I know all of you are familiar with it, but I want to get it on the record, of course, is located at Spa Road and Forest Drive. And it is under a number of different zoning classifications. Some of the property along the Forest Drive frontage is zoned professional, and most of the rest is zoned residential, either under R3, R2, or R1A. The site is about 175 acres in total, and what is being proposed is a development of about 34 of those acres. And the rest of the property, as Mr. Smith mentioned, will be in some fashion or form subject to easements in perpetuity, and you will not see any further development. It really is unprecedented. The other uses on the overall site include the dressage facility or the equestrian facility, and then there's going to be a wellness house, which is already in a farmhouse on the property, but Ms. Janet Richardson Pearson is contributing acreage to the wellness house so it can build a new facility. And for those of you that don't know, the wellness house supports cancer patients and really provides a fine service to our community. What we are proposing is an institution for care of the aged. That's what it's called under the city code. And if you want to take a look at the definition, it's under 21.72. I won't read it to you, but it allows for what's known as a continuing care retirement community, or CCRC. The fact is that there's a number of benefits aside from the environmental features that will accrue to the city. In addition to the no net loss, which is obviously on a site like this really substantial, as you will hear, and no net loss meaning we're not taking down any trees that aren't going to be replaced. There will be a stormwater management process that will treat 125% of the stormwater on site, which is not required by law, but it's a resolution, as you may recall from the city council. It's a desire that the stormwater be treated in that fashion, and it will be on this site. And then with respect to road improvements, you know, you'll hear that there's really a minimal amount of new trips being generated by this use, because, you know, what's on the site now is an office building and a couple of residences, and they will be taken down and then replaced by the CCRC, but the CCRC doesn't generate a lot of traffic. The occupants are not traveling during the peak hours, and that's just the way it works, and it's fortunate with respect to the impact on Forest Drive. Nonetheless, there will be improvements on Forest Drive that we will discuss, and they more than mitigate the impact of the traffic. But maybe most importantly, there will be a road that will connect from Spa Road all the way over to Newtown Drive. That's a very big deal because we finally have a redundancy or a redundant road parallel to Forest Drive. And that will allow many people who live on the peninsula to avoid coming onto Forest Drive to go to the CVS and go to Safeway and the other establishments. And that will be accomplished without getting into a lot of detail now. National Lutheran will build that road from the Spa Road section over to its westernmost boundary. And then there's a stretch that will run from an adjacent property owner that's going to be in for an approval of a project before you. And the American Legion is next to it, and National Lutheran is acquiring some of that land from from American Legion is paying for it and will contribute it to the city. And then the adjacent property known as Ingerman will contribute its land, and the road will be built by Ingerman in part and the city in part, that last leg of the road, and it will be designed by National Lutheran. So that's a big benefit. And you know, all of this, as Mr. Smith indicated, took a lot of time. There has been a collaborative effort, really unlike I have ever seen, and I've been doing this for a long time in the city. And this has been a 10-year exercise. And if you recall, and I'm sure many of you do recall, there was at one time the concept of the village of Crystal Spring. And that village of Crystal Spring was not only a continuing care retirement community, but it was much more proposed. It was retail, it was housing, it was a hotel, there was going to be a grocery store, there was going to be a West Marine. I'm sure some of you may recall that. And from that, this project has evolved into what really is a minimal impact on the property, with a use that has probably less of an impact on the roads and the community and the environment than almost anything that could go on the site. And there's no impact on schools, obviously. And the community was very engaged, and my client was very engaged. As Mr. Smith indicated, I rarely heard them say no. They decided that they wanted this location and could work with this location, and just worked in tandem with the Department of Planning and Zoning and the community. You may recall that this site was also described, or is also described under the current comprehensive plan, as an opportunity area. And as an opportunity area, the description in the comprehensive plan is that the development should be pushed closer to Forest Drive and the environmental features not disturbed on the balance of the site. And that's exactly what's going on. You will see from the plans that even though this project is pushed closer to Forest Drive, there's still a significant buffer between the structure and Forest Drive. So when you drive down Forest Drive, you're not going to see this project. You're just not going to see the buildings. You will see the buildings once Skipper Drive is constructed, and that's where you will be able to observe the architecture and what goes on. But you're going to see a significantly buffered area along the Forest Drive frontage. There was a contextual study done with regard to the architecture. You have seen many projects come before you, and you say, well, geez, this doesn't look like it belongs in Annapolis, where there was a contextual study going in, and a great deal of time was spent working on the architecture. So it does look like it belongs here. I do want to say that recognition should go to Janet Richardson Pearson. She's been a good steward of the land. She's extremely charitable in giving the land for the wellness house, as I mentioned. And it is true that when she bought this property in the 90s, and I remember it myself, US Home had it under contract and was going to create a subdivision there called Steeplegate. And I'm going to show you just in a moment what that plan looked like. And it's not necessarily relevant today, but it's just something that everybody ought to know, that Janet stepped up at a time when the real estate market was not good. It was one of those downturns, and that's where US Home hesitated on their contracts. And Janet stepped in and bought the property, and she prevented largely herself that site being developed, because there was a sketch plan pending before Anne Arundel County wasn't annexed at that time for these 600 and some units. And while Janet, I would say, would have preferred a greater mix of uses on the property than we ended up with, she understands, and she has agreed to the imposition of a couple of easements, really. There's one that she volunteered when this property was annexed in 2005. This came from her. She volunteered to put 75 acres, which included the equestrian facility, into a conservation easement. But on top of that, there's another 50 acres, more or less, that is going into a conservation easement and just is not going to be disturbed. The easement, both the easement, and there's a declaration of covenants that pertain to the frontage, but the conservation easement is in our exhibit package, and I'll refer to that later. But that is in favor of Scenic Rivers Trust. That was what the parties discussed and negotiated, and the desire was to have a organization that could manage a conservation easement, and that was the conclusion reached, that there was this easement, is an easement that's going to be granted to the Scenic Rivers Trust, provided this application is successful. And there were several key issues after a lot of bantering back and forth and discussion about what should go on the property and where should it go. There were 4, what I would say, critical issues that have been largely resolved from the vantage point of most of the original opponents, who are well organized, and the City Department of Planning and Zoning, working with everybody. And the keys here, the 4 keys were: 1, no net loss. That's been achieved. So there's no net loss of trees on the site. Stormwater had to be managed, as I mentioned, at 125%. And then traffic had to be handled appropriately, including that portion of the redundant road or the relief road or connector road, whatever you want to call it. And then there had to have been an agreement with respect to the conservation easement. And they took time to reach, and a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of negotiation, but we think we have reached a satisfactory conclusion from the point of view of the city and the strongest opponents. There's always opponents, regardless. There's some folks that would like to see absolutely nothing on this property, and I understand that, but it is private property. There's private property rights, and I think you will see that there's really not. It would be difficult to do much less on this property than what is proposed. So we come to you with this package that's been created that allows for a continuing care retirement community and little else. There's an exhibit package that has been distributed, and I have to apologize to you because part of what I was directed to do is give you hard copies, and you have over 1,000 pages of exhibits, and they contain exhibits 1 through 19 with some subsidiary sections. And I know, Mr. Chairman, you don't want me to question my witnesses about each and every page in those documents, and I certainly will not be doing that. But I will just say that included in the exhibits is an affidavit of posting, affidavits of notification. That's in Exhibit 1. We have information about our community meeting in Exhibit 2. And then I mentioned Exhibit 3, which I'm going to pull up on the screen shortly. I know we've set aside a couple of nights for hearings, and I want to tell you who our witnesses are. First, this evening, I'm going to call Larry Bradshaw from National Lutheran, and then Kevin Johnson, our civil engineer, and then Mike Klabasco, who's served as the forester on this project. After that, I would respectfully ask that we take a pause from our presentation and allow Gerald Weingrad to speak, because as you've heard, he's going to be out of the country in January, and he's been instrumental in the discussions and negotiations and just overall history of the site. And tonight I would like to have him speak so he doesn't miss the opportunity to speak when he's away in January. We then have Mark Pelosi, who's our landscape architect, Aaron Campbell, the architect on the job. Nancy Randall is the traffic consultant, and you should know that the traffic impact study was done in the usual way, where the city obtained a traffic impact study paid by the applicant, but performed on behalf of the city. And I think the consultant selected by the city and Ms. Randall largely agree on the outcome. And then finally, I have John Erison, who's obviously you're familiar with Mr. Erison. He's going to testify as our land planner. And just so you know, Mr. Erison was involved early on in the Crystal Spring project when he was the planning director. And just to be safe, he did get clearance from the Ethics Commission, because now we have really an entirely new project. And the opinion he got was that since this is a new project, he wasn't violating any ethics. So, Mr. Sale, just a little bit of a housekeeping matter. I have the professional biographies for each of the witnesses that are going to be testifying as experts. And, sometimes I've heard the Planning Commission say that it doesn't recognize experts, and sometimes I think it does. I would offer them as experts. I want to try to keep things moving along. Is it the position of the Planning Commission that it doesn't recognize experts, or will you recognize them? Let me just ask you that.
We don't make an official determination to recognize experts, but what I would expect from each person that is about to talk is when they introduce themselves, they make a 10 seconds or less qualifications rant
Okay.
about themselves, which I would expect anybody to do in a brief that we don't know.
All right.
One other question I have is I hear what you're going to do with all your sections. And to be clear with Tom Smith, I believe it was you guys brief and then the staff for that section would give rebuttal. Then it goes back to you, then back to staff, back to you, back to staff. Is that correct, Tom?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay. And then commissioners, we're going to wait. We could either wait to the end or we could question as we go. Now, if we wait to the end, we might forget things. But if we question as we go, it might actually be more efficient. So I'm leaning towards as we go. Bob, Alex, gang, what do you think?
Yeah,
And
by
also-
section.
And also Alan Hyatt, what do you think? I think it'll work well if we question as we go by section.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's fine because in talking to Mr. Smith, we had agreed on a procedure, subject to your approval that, we would introduce each witness. I would have some questions and the witness would summarize their respective areas of expertise. And then Mr. Smith or someone else from the city would either rebut or agree or disagree or whatever it is they do. And then at the conclusion of that, it seems to me that the planning commission would have the opportunity to ask questions and then we go on to the next.
All right, that sounds excellent, Mr. Hyatt, to me. Diane, you got something to say?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I just want to mention that I also have a long history with this project, and I did not ask for a separate legal opinion from the Ethics Commission, but I agree that it is a new project. And as with the case with John Erison, he doesn't have a conflict, nor do I. But I just wanted to state that for the record in case anyone wants to challenge that, do so now.
What is your possible influence from the past?
There is no possible influence. I was just involved. I was on the Annapolis Environmental Commission when this was first, when it came in as a different application many years ago, almost a decade ago, as people are saying.
Well, that wouldn't
it's a
matter because I was on the planning commission when it came through previous, and so was Bob Waldman for the midi iteration. So we would all have to recuse ourselves. But you, yeah, it's
Yep.
not a problem.
I just wanted
Thank
to
you.
put that on the record. So, okay, just as long as
Thank
no
you.
one has an issue and doesn't
Okay,
try
Bob?
to shoot me at the end. Thanks.
Mr. Hyatt, are you proposing Mr. Weingrad as one of your witnesses, or are you proposing that we open the public hearing on a very temporary basis in order to accommodate him and recognize him as a very independent witness?
It's the latter. I'm not calling Mr. Weingrad as a witness for the applicant. He is not able to be here in January, and he's been instrumental throughout this process. And so my request is to take him out of order, so to speak. Members of the public may, I guess, typically wouldn't speak until after our presentation, but in this case, I'm asking for an exception to be made. And what I'm proposing this evening is after Mr. Klobasco testifies and the city responds to him. At that point, Mr. Weingrad would have the opportunity to speak, because then he would have heard our civil engineer, our forester, and Mr. Bradshaw. And I think it'd be a good opportunity and an appropriate time for him to speak.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, and that would be way down the road. And he's representing a major group.
I think, and he'll explain it to you, but I think he's the spokesperson for a significant number of people that had organized with respect to this project. So I think.
Okay, well, when Mr. Klobasco finishes, I'm fine with opening up public testimony for that. And we're pretty much aware of this. So
Okay.
any other commissioners have issue? Mr. Beard? None?
None.
Okay, thanks.
So, Mr. Sale, I would for the record, offer our exhibits 1 through 19 into the record if they're not already there, but I offer them into the record, and then we can briefly review certain exhibits with respect to the testimony of the experts if you feel the need when we call them. And
More pictures are better than none or less.
so you got plenty of pictures in the 1,000 and some pages, I can tell you that. So
Yeah, I can barely carry it here.
and then what I have been, shall we say, admonished before, and I'm not going to go through or I do not plan to go through a tedious Q&A session with all the witnesses. There may be times when I'm going to ask questions because I think it's appropriate, but in many cases, I'm going to ask our witnesses to summarize in their respective fields. I think it'll save some time. You have the full package of these exhibits. It's a lot. There's a number of weeks that we're going to be doing this. So hopefully at your leisure, you'll have the opportunity to review some of this. And
I will ask that each person that is presenting, if they have one particularly good item that gives awareness for the public, to please present that on the screen for all the
yeah, they
public.
do. I think that each of them will have a certain number of plans that are the most relevant. Let's put it that way. There's a lot of plans. There's a lot of drawings. Not every one has to be viewed, but the key ones I think would be important to put up on the screen for your benefit and for the public's benefit. So before I call my first witness, I do want to share my screen and just show you the background, if I can do that.
We see it. Thanks.
Okay, so this is Steeplegate. And if you
Could zoom in, please.
Yeah. So this is Forest Drive here, Spa Road. And let me just shrink it a little bit. And I just want everybody to see it because this is maybe what could have happened back in the day, and it didn't. Ms. Janet or Ms. Richardson Pearson acquired this property really so this wouldn't happen. Now, I'm not saying it would have happened, but it was on the drawing boards and it was at Anne Arundel County because this property was not in the city at the time. And this is only 80 some acres. This is like half. This is the Forest Drive frontage. And I will say that this project certainly didn't take into consideration the environmental features that are on that property. And I will also say that the village of Crystal Spring didn't do what Providence Point has done. And by that, I mean, Providence Point has gone through a painstaking exercise to respect the environmental features and locate improvements in a way that does the least amount of damage and has the least impact on environmental features. Obviously, this doesn't. This is like clearing the site, and it would have been another Hunt Meadow type of a community, is really what it would have been. So I just wanted to show you that because this is what could have happened, and now we have really probably. I mean, I don't want to discount what the city ends up with if this project gets approved with all that undisturbed property in perpetuity as a result of the easements. So that's I just wanted you to see that, and if no one else has any questions on that, I'll stop sharing it and we'll move on to my first witness. Anybody have anything to?
Please move.
Okay.
Stop sharing.
All right, so I will call Larry Bradshaw as the first witness, and Mr. Bradshaw, I would ask you to tell the members of the Planning Commission who you are and what it is you do and how you are affiliated with National Lutheran Communities and Services.
Great, thanks, Alan. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thanks for the opportunity to speak with you tonight on behalf of the Village of Providence Point. As has been said by both Alan and by Tom, This project has been going around for a long time, and other than the two of them, I'm probably have the longest tenure on this call in being involved with it. So I'm happy to be here. But for the record, my name is Lawrence Bradshaw. I'm the former president and CEO of National Lutheran Communities and Services, and currently am special advisor to the Village of Providence Point. I retired recently in August, but I am staying on to work with National Lutheran and the development team along with the city to move this project forward. So my position is authorized to speak on behalf of National Lutheran and also to make decisions on the organization's behalf. So that's my role here tonight. You've heard an overview from both Mr. Smith and Mr. Hyatt, and I'm going to try to keep everything at a very high level because you have a lot of very technical presentations coming. And I appreciate the fact that you have tonight being a long night and a couple other nights to go. So I wanted just to present to you several things that you might be of interest to the project that are maybe less of a technical arrangement. Just as some background, National Lutheran became involved in this project in 2010 when we were approached by the former developers, Affirmative Hills Point from Connecticut, and asked to be part of a multi-use site. At that time, there were several different other types of organizations other than a continuing care retirement community, but retail stores and those such things, as Mr. Hyatt has alluded to. That project moved along for about 6 years until about 2016, when it became very apparent to me that this project was not going to go forward as a multi-use. So we negotiated with the developers, and we became the sole developer of the project in 2016. And since that time, we have been working very closely with the city planning department, along with the concerned citizens for proper development, of which former Senator Weingrad has been leading up. So since that time, we have been, 2016, we have been the only developer, and we've been focused solely on the continuing care retirement community. So before I go forward, though, I do want to just give some kudos. You've heard a lot of really nice things about Mrs. Janet Richardson Pearson. I just want to echo it. And I was going to talk about the developments, but I think Alan and Tom have done that. But I think what you're going to see here tonight is really the result of how hard she has worked in advocating for the city of Annapolis. NLCS is an organization, and me personally have been very fortunate to have such a wonderful partner in working through this as Mrs. Richardson Pearson. She has been supportive as we have decreased the footprint, we've increased the conservation easement, and she's been so supporting in the environmental features and has been invaluable in the conceptual development of the project. And when this project is hopefully a reality and hopefully approved by this commission, the city of Annapolis will really have Janet to thank you for her generosity in seeing this project through to becoming a reality. So I didn't want to go any farther without really recognizing just all of the hard work that she did. But just to get into my presentation very quickly, we've been asked many times over the years, why is this project so important to Annapolis? And from a National Lutheran standpoint, it really is twofold. One is our structure, National Lutheran Community Services, is a not-for-profit organization. We're affiliated with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and we're closely associated with the three synods in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. It'd be the Synod of Virginia, the Synod of Washington, D.C. Metro, and then the Synod of Delaware, Maryland. And the Synod of Delaware, Maryland is where the city of Annapolis resides. And when I became interested in this project in 2010 on behalf of NLCS, it really was to have a presence in our Delaware, Maryland Synod so we could have an organization to support and serve those residents or those citizens who are a part of that synod. So that's the first reason why we were really expanding our footprint to match our synodical relationships. But secondly, and more interested, my background before I was a CEO was a CFO, and I've been in senior living for 39 years. But most interesting to me was the demographics in Annapolis. If you look at the market data and the demographics of the city of Annapolis, and we had this done by a third-party firm called Dixon Hughes, the demographics and the project penetration rates and really those issues that you look at to see how viable this project can be were probably the best demographics that I have seen in my 39 years of developing projects like this. And when I compare it to the Dixon Hughes database, the number of individuals that the Village at Providence Point will have to attract to come in to achieve stabilized occupancy is pretty much 75% less than a lot of the other communities that are going on around the country. So the real reason why Annapolis, A, it's the capital of Maryland, B, it has a great community, but C, it was part of our synodical relationship, and D, the demographics were very positive to move forward. So that's why the city of Annapolis. So that gives you a little bit of background. I'd like to talk a little bit about what is a CCRC, continuing care retirement community. So a continuing care retirement community is really an organization that has multiple levels of service to residents 60 to 62 years and older. And the project you have before you tonight will include independent living, will include assisted living with a focus on dementia and memory support, and then it will have a skilled nursing facility. This community is regulated by the Maryland Department of Aging. The Maryland Department of Aging has to approve all of the contracts. They have to approve all of our marketing material, and they have to approve all of the financial feasibility models. So we are very much regulated by the Maryland Department of Aging. But a CCRC really has, it's a unique business model, but it's also a unique social model. So the first thing that makes a CCRC a little bit different is its contract components. So at the Village at Providence Point, there will be two types of contract, not overly exciting descriptions, but a contract A and a contract C. And these are basically regulatory and standard language. The contract A is a life care contract. And what it means is if someone comes into the Village at Providence Point, signs that contract, we have an obligation as an organization to provide them health care through the remainder of their life. It is a prepaid health contract, and the service package matches that, but it is an obligation to take care of them for the rest of their life. A type C contract is very similar. It does not have a healthcare component in it, but it does have, again, that life use services fee, or not life use services obligation, if you will, that the Village of Providence Point will have an obligation to take care of any resident that comes in over the life of over the rest of their life, whether or not it's in their original unit of an independent living, or they go to assisted living, or they go to skilled nursing. But that's what makes this contract a little different, in that it is not something that someone is going to buy into or take care of the contract and leave after 5 years. They're individuals who are coming into the Village of Providence Point are going to stay there over the rest of their lives. And one very important element is over our 130 years history at National Lutheran, we've never asked anyone to leave who no longer have the ability to pay. Something will happen to some of these residents in this community. They'll have a catastrophic health condition or health issue or other issues that will deplete their resources. And as their resources are depleted, we do make a promise that we will take care of them regardless of their ability to pay as they move through the project. So it's a little bit of the residents come in, they get qualified, but then we always know that their things do happen. And if we just quantify this for you a little bit, as an organization, we have 4 communities that are currently operating. Next year in 2022, we're estimating to provide about $1.2 million of that care in various communities for individuals who can no longer pay their way. So that's a very important element to what we're trying to do. And the other piece of the pie, there's really 2 sources of revenue for the Village of Providence Point. The first is what we call an entrance fee, and that's an entrance fee that the resident or residents will pay upfront. It does have a refundable component where at the end of their life, all of that money can go back to them. That's at a little higher price point. And the second would be a lower price fee, but does not have the refundability aspect to it. So that's the first part of being a CCRC, that you do have the entrance fee component. And the second is just the service package. And in the service packet, there's a monthly fee paid, and those fees will really cover things such as dining service, housekeeping, laundry, maintenance, utilities, and all of the community activities, including the fitness center, the pool, and all of those things that come along. So it's none of these units are being sold as a fee simple or any kind of transfer, and none of the units are being rented. I characterize it as this is a contract for life services for the remainder of their lives. And that's really what a CCRC is. So with that being background, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the site. And I think, Alan, you have a slide that shows
Yep.
the evolution of this project. If you wouldn't mind bringing that up,
I
think it might be helpful for the commission. And for those of you who've been around for a long time, you're probably aware of this.
Right.
But
yeah, I'll pull that up. And if you would, again, since you've been involved with it so long, kind of explain the evolution of the site and how it ended up where it is today. So let me do that.
Okay. Yeah. So as Alan's pulling that up, you can see on your screen, I hope everybody can see that, this is an evolution of the site from April 2011 to July 2021, from left to right. In April 2011, you can see that pretty much all of the property, with the exception of the equestrian center, which is the kind of gray area to the right there where Alan's pointing, would have been developed. The blue items in this particular illustration would be the continuing care retirement community, or the CCRC. The areas up front, closer to Forest Drive, were planned to be a grocery store, maybe a Western Marine or Harris Teeter. And then there was non-age restricted housing in a lot of the yellow areas there, along with a chapel, potential community center, potential theater, et cetera. And this was the first conceptual plan of the project. And as many of you may recall, there was this tremendous amount of pushback on this plan. So we worked and we tried to really save some of the multi-use aspects, but weren't really able to do it. And in May 2014, we significantly lowered a lot of the age restricting housing. We removed about 40,000 square foot of retail space, and took away some of the other things like the theater and those type of things. And it really didn't work very well. Again, a lot of concern from the public on the magnitude of the project, the trees that were being leveled, et cetera. And so we kind of moved on to that. And it was in the 7-year period between the middle and the far right is where we took over as the developer. And not to get too anecdotal in this presentation, but there was a time when I think there was a turning point. I won't ask Tom Smith to confirm this, but there was a time that we had a meeting with planning staff and it did not go well. And we just didn't seem to come to any kind of solution. And I remember calling up Tom, and at that time, Pete Gutwald, and saying, I want to come over to your office and I want to spend an hour. And this was really, as I was driving into Annapolis, I said, this project's either going to die today or it's going to try to move forward. And I sat in with Mr. Gutwald and Mr. Smith in their offices, and I had a map, and I said, how do we make this work? How can we make this work from that will be a great thing for the city, and it will be an opportunity for this project to move forward. And we spent probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'm no engineer, I'm no architect, I don't draw anything other than stick figures. But I had a pink highlighter, and it's probably somewhere in my office things. I can still find it, where Tom and Pete and I said, if we do this, we might be able to move forward. And that really began the collaboration of this project. So that gives you a little bit of background of the site. Alan mentioned the kind of what I would say the big four. And it's about this time in 2017, 2018 that I really began to have the opportunity to work closely with Gerald Weingrad on how same kind of process. How can we make this work? And Gerald and his group, and I'm sure, and Gerald will be talking later, so I don't want to speak for him. But out of those conversations came up with the big four. And I would call it the final four, but I'd probably get in trouble for some kind of a copyright with NCAA basketball. But the final four really were the preservation of trees. You're going to hear Mike Klabasco talk about that in a few minutes. But this project will have a no net loss of trees. The current forest covers 120, the current site has 124 acres of forest. And after the project, the site will have at least 124 acres of forest. So that's a very different thing than we were doing early on. Secondly, the stormwater management process, you're going to hear Kevin Johnson, our civil engineer, speak to that immediately after me, was able to design a management system that would exceed the 125% requirement for stormwater retention on site. And in addition, on this site, I don't know, Alan, if you can show the approximate location of the stream restoration. We'll be fixing an eroded stream channel on the property where a lot of water has come off of the athletic fields at the middle school under Spa Road, and then has eroded this stream channel. So we'll be fixing about 520 feet, or is it 502 feet? I always want to mix them up, but it's Mike will clarify it. We'll be fixing over 500 feet of this eroded stream channel, and will be restored to reduce runoff into Crab Creek and provide an additional 17,300 cubic feet of water quality treatment to the south stormwater management system. And also the stormwater management system has been designed to handle a 25-year storm. Those were the first two, and probably took the most work and development, but traffic, as you mentioned, has been looked at. You'll hear Nancy Randall speak to that. But I looked at the new data that has just come through today. And this project will generate less than 20 additional trips in the morning rush hour traffic and less than 35 additional trips in the evening, for a total of less than 60 trips on a daily basis. And as Alan has mentioned, even though the trips will not be substantial, and I want to make clear that this will be a very active population in our independent living. And they will be moving around the city of Annapolis. We will have a transportation system that will be taking many of our residents to shopping trips and medical appointments and down to Old Town Annapolis in that area. But this will be an active group of individuals. So they will do trips, but they probably won't do a lot of them in the rush hour. They'll like me, I'm now retired, so I like to avoid that rush hour traffic. So you'll see a lot of that, which is why our trip generation is fairly small. But we'll also be including some mitigation on both Forest Drive and Spa Road that we believe will make the project, the traffic around the project better even after the project than it is now. And so Nancy Randall will be talking a lot about that. And then Alan spoke to the conservation easement. We did a lot of work with Mr. Weingrad and also the Scenic Rivers Land Trust to come up with a document. And also, again, giving credit to Mrs. Janet Richardson Pearson on her willingness to work forward to develop a conservation easement that will cover the property. And as Alan said, will basically eliminate any further development on this site. The conservation easement will not cover the exact site of the CCRC, the Village of Providence Point. The blue in this illustration on the right. However, we have agreed to provide a restrictive deed covenant on that 52 acres of land where the project will be, which will also eliminate any abilities to expand beyond the 350 units that we plan on having at the project. So all in all, I think what you see on this third illustration to the right is basically going to be it. There will not be any other opportunities to do anything. And as we mentioned, Mrs. Janet Richardson Pearson will be relocating the wellness center to where.
Hold on. Can you zoom in on that one on the right? We can't really see everything on our computer screens. That's like a whole screen would be much better because we can't really see that well at all. And it's the first time in an hour we've gotten a picture of the development. So I want to get it while I can. I don't know if I'm going to see one again.
my able assistant, Alan, is working his way through it. I can see it.
That's it.
There.
Mhm. Here we
There
go.
you go. Is that
There
better?
you go.
Okay.
But we still don't see it all.
Well, that's a pretty good chunk of it. I mean, we can,
The bottom part doesn't really count towards the development anyway, does it?
right.
But keep
No,
going.
that's right.
Keep going.
The development's all taking place up here, as Mr. Bradshaw indicated. So that, but all this is conservation easement, and we'll have a wellness house down here, and then you have the equestrian facility there. But what you see here is the way it's going to be in perpetuity, and that's a long time.
Even the farm?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. Yep. So I'm sorry, did you have any questions for Mr. Bradshaw about the site?
Well, he was in the middle of it. I didn't want to stop
Okay.
him. I just wanted to see the picture while he was talking.
Yep.
Okay. So I can tell you a little bit, you'll hear more about this, but if you just look at the site, so on the left, so you'll see the red area in red is really the development site. The road going right through the middle is Skipper's Lane. And I think Alan mentioned that earlier. That project, that road will be built as a parallel road to Forest Drive. And then as you go from right to left on that road, when you get to the blue area there, that is primarily the main CCRC building on both the left and on the top side of Skipper's Drive would be what we would call Maison Court units. So our independent living and our healthcare will be in that building. And then if you go to the west of Crystal Spring Farm Road, those will be 30 independent cottages that will be there. And you can see, and one really major concept that we tried to do as we developed this was we wanted the environment to drive the development and the footprint versus the footprint driving the development. And you can see just to the west of Crystal Spring Farm Drive, Alan, if you can kind of point at that, the dark green area there, we basically, there was a large stand of trees that we designed all of these cottages around, right in there. Just there you go. So that was a significant forest of I don't know, Mike Labasco can certainly give you details, but that was something that we wanted to save. And so we built around that so we could preserve that forest. So as those specimen trees were identified, we tried to put the footprint and save those specimen trees wherever we could. So that's really a kind of an overview of the project itself. And I think the last thing, Mr. Chairman, that I want to say is that we have, as we were working with Senator Weingrad and his group, we did provide a letter of commitment to Senator Weingrad and his group, along with planning and zoning that outlined all of the commitments that we have, such as no net loss, preservation of trees, stormwater management, traffic. And then in addition to that agreement that we provided both to Mr. Weingrad and planning and zoning, we also provided another commitment letter to planning and zoning outlining our details of our construction management, because we wanted to make sure that as we construct this project, if the citizens aren't happy, or if we're doing something that is not in compliance with our commitment, we are creating contact measures. So citizens the city can contact our superintendent of staff, superintendent on the job. And we will have ongoing meetings that will be the people will be invited so people can see exactly what we're doing. We want this to be very transparent. We don't want to hide anything. And as we're constructing this project, assuming it is approved by this commission, we want to make sure that process is just as transparent as everything else. And so I will leave it there and ask any questions, but I would like to, again, say thank you to the many people, certainly Tom Smith and his staff, and Mrs. Richardson Pearson, and of course, the development team that you're going to be hearing about. It's just been a great opportunity. It's been a long opportunity. I think I had more hair in addition to not being retired at the time this started, but I think it will be a wonderful and a tremendous asset to the city of Annapolis as this project moves forward. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate your willingness to listen today, and I'll open it up to questions at this time.
Larry, just interrupt you for a moment. I did pull up on the screen the letter that you referred to, that you sent to Mr. Weingrad in June, and you mentioned the 4 critical factors. This in fact describes the 4 features that you talked about, namely forest clearing, no net loss, stormwater, traffic, and the conservation easement. And you spelled that out in this letter. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you go on record here publicly that you will stand by this, and this would be a potential condition of approval, assuming approval is granted by this body, but you stand behind what you represented in this letter. Is that correct?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Okay. And then lastly, I don't know if you mentioned it, but how many employees do you anticipate the facility having?
We expect to have about 150 employees on this site, both full-time and part-time, once we're open and occupied, and with an annual salary budget of probably around between $6.5 and $7 million. So it's going to be a significant opportunity for jobs in the community. And while I mentioned we were a not-for-profit, we are a not-for-profit organization, we still are subject to real estate taxes, and we've estimated that real estate taxes on this project will be around $1.5 to $7 million, depending on how things shake out. But we think it will be a real opportunity, economic opportunity for the city of Annapolis.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any further questions at this time for Mr. Bradshaw. I don't know if Mr. Smith wants to weigh in at this time with respect to this witness or not. Or if you have any questions.
I do not have any questions, Mr. Hyatt. I appreciate the opportunity.
And Mr. Bradshaw, you mentioned you're retired, but are you representing as a CEO for Lutheran or no?
I am. I have been retired, and we do have a new president, CEO. I am representing the organization through this project because of my history with the project.
Gotcha.
So while I'm retired, I'm still working, and somewhere my new boss, the new president, CEO, is probably on this listening to make sure I say everything correctly.
Okay.
But I haven't
Thank
gotten
you.
texted that I said anything incorrectly yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradshaw. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll call Kevin Johnson as my next witness. You on there, Kevin?
I just issued the invitation.
Okay,
Just
all
a
right.
second.
While we're waiting, can I just ask a quick question? I know Mr. Bradshaw, under the old application, we were talking about trying to hire city residents as employees. Is that still part of the plan?
That is part of the plan. I think one of the things that we've talked about, I know I've talked about it with the mayor. I've also talked it with other members of the Annapolis community about really looking at opportunities to hire locally, because that certainly is our preference, because I think that's where we get the most involvement. So that will be our plan for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Also have a quick question, since you brought it up about the fact that even though you're a nonprofit, but you're still subject to property taxes. I'm just sort of curious how one would value a property like this, given that, how it's used as you described.
So in the state of Maryland, and I'm certainly not a lawyer, so I don't want to get in trouble, but in the state of Maryland here, independent living residents, such as we're talking about with the cottages and the main building and the Maison Courts, are subject to the same level of taxation as any other property in the state of Maryland. So my guess is I did speak with the assessor in Annapolis and in Annapolis or Anne Arundel County. And they said, well, the starting point will be construction costs. And that's all the guidance they gave me. But I think that's a fair place to start the real estate transaction. That's in essence how I've calculated the projected real estate taxes. Just to clarify, the healthcare areas, skilled nursing and assisted living are exempt from taxes in the state of Maryland, but the others are all fully taxed.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Mr. Johnson, are you on? I see, look like you're muted here.
Okay, I see,
I hear you.
hear you, but I don't.
Don't-
There we go. Hold on. Sorry.
Okay, good. All right.
Two Kevin Johnsons on the screen.
When I go to share my screen, it's on my desktop, which is a larger
Gotcha.
view so that I can see it.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to share my screen again here, and we have Mr. Johnson's CV up on the screen. Mr. Johnson, you want to do just a quick synopsis of your professional background, because I'm offering you as an expert in the field of civil engineering, and I don't know that the Planning Commission is familiar with you, so just give them a description of your professional background, please.
Sure. First, thank you for the opportunity tonight. My name is Kevin Johnson. I'm the president of Johnson Burnett. We've been providing civil engineering and land surveying services for what will be 20 years. Our 20th anniversary will be in 2022. So we're looking forward to that. Personally, I've been practicing civil engineer for 38 years and have been licensed in the state of Maryland since 1988 as a professional engineer. I provided testimony, participated in boards and commissions like this one throughout the state of Maryland throughout my career.
Mr. Chairman, I would offer Mr. Johnson as an expert witness in the field of civil engineering.
Please continue. It's
Okay.
faster, please.
Okay, all right. So I think Mr. Johnson's going to share his screen. I'm going to ask him to explain certain aspects of this project, and I'll try to move along because it's now 8:20 and you're witness number 2. So I'm a little bit behind schedule here. So let me just confirm that you're familiar with the city code at this time and its requirements with respect to the topic that's in front of the Planning Commission tonight. Is that correct?
Yes, I have reviewed the relevant sections of the city code, particularly as it relates to zoning, adequate public facilities, the environment, and the subdivision regulations.
All right, then what I'd like you to do is explain to the Planning Commission, give them a description, and hopefully you can pull up the appropriate plan showing what the total site is and how much is being disturbed and where the development's located. I think they have a pretty good sense of it, but if you can just show it from your plan, I think it would help make it clear.
I'm trying to get the screen share here. Madeline, I don't know if you can enable that or if I need to.
It should be free for you to do. If not, staff, please make sure Kevin Johnson's a panelist.
Yes, yeah, Kevin, you are a panelist. Both of your accounts, it should.
There you go.
There we go.
Thank you.
Here it goes. Sorry for that delay.
Thank you.
So just wanted to put the property in the subdivision back into context for you on this overall subdivision plan. As you'll see, we have Forest Drive across the top of the page, and then Spa Road continues to the south. The whole property is 175.63 acres, as you've seen in some of the other aerial views, and as you see here. The two parts that I want to most point out is that what we're calling, what will be lot 1 will be, and lot 7 will combined be 75 acres that will be covered by the conservation easement that Ms. Richardson Pearson first proffered in the annexation agreement. Secondly, we have what will be lot 2, which is an existing forested area that will be preserved and is outside the limits of disturbance and development for the project. The one comment I wanted to make is down here along Spa Road is a carve out of a small lot 7 that is the site for the future wellness house relocation, which will move from its area over here to a more centrally located area on Spa. Again, it'll come up in some other exhibits, but south of that will be the stream restoration area, which is again will be located on lot 1, but outside the development area. When we move closer in and look at the development that we're presenting here tonight, what you see on the screen here, the developable area is roughly 34 acres of disturbance within the 45, 50 acres of the footprint that it occupies. So the end result is that between the areas being preserved and reforested on the development property, there'll be 141 acres that ultimately will be left undisturbed at the conclusion of the project.
So if you could, I'd say fairly briefly, run through the proposed development and how it relates to the site design requirements in the city code, and you know, just talk about the connection to public streets and the vehicle circulation, parking, loading, lighting, waste disposal. Just run through that, the storage and where it's generally located, just so the members of the commission understand how everything flows throughout this developed site.
Sure. So the two main points of access will be a reconstruction of the Crystal Spring Farm entrance on the Forest Drive, which will be now a right-in, right-out movement onto Forest. And then the future connection of Skipper's Lane, the Skipper's Lane extension will intersect Spa at this location along the southern edge. What we're proposing is that the rights of way and streets for the extension of Skipper's Lane and the improvements for Crystal Spring Farm Drive will be public streets and dedicated to public use. The remaining circulation of the loop road that will go around the main IL building and then to serve the cottages will be a private road that will be maintained and controlled by the applicant. We feel the other part is that while we're showing a temporary terminus at the western boundary, the intention is that Skipper's Lane will be further extended to down to Newtown to complete the grid network, improving the overall circulation for the community.
Can I ask a quick question about that?
Sure.
When you anticipate that the throughput of Skipper's Lane to happen with respect to the phasing of the development, is that just a function of getting the other parties involved and finishing those details, or what's the phasing going to be like?
So I'll take a first stab at it, and Alan can correct any misstatements I make. Agreements for the right-of-way have essentially been agreed to by the adjoining property owners. The development that I believe is coming into the city immediately to the west, and then Lutheran Homes' commitment to purchase the portion of the American Legion that's needed for their contribution of the right-of-way. So the real estate is set to be made available. Lutheran Home, is my understanding, is committed to providing the design of the roadway. And while the adjacent development will be responsible for their piece, there's a city contribution for construction of the American Legion piece. I think from a timing standpoint, you know, the build out of the Provident Point community is several years. And I think if those activities progress at a reasonable pace, that road connection can be done, if not upon the completion of our project, very shortly thereafter.
It's so if it doesn't happen right away, you don't think it's I guess the way to say it is you're not in the critical path. It would be external issues that might prevent it from being completed at the same time that this development would be completed.
That's correct. It would
Yeah.
be elements outside of our control.
Gotcha.
Hey, Alex,
Thanks.
can we wait for the further questions till he finishes? And
Yep.
that way we'll just go by section. That way we'll just stick to the plan.
Okay,
Thanks, Alex.
sorry. Yep.
So when we talk about parking and loading, the bulk of the parking for the project, in which the main parking driver is the independent living main building, is all structured underneath the footprint of the main building, as well as there's structured parking underneath the two Maison units. The cottage units each have garages, so there's not a requirement that they park outside in the driveway. We have provided some surface parking scattered throughout the project, primarily for guests and other ancillary uses, and not really dependent on those spaces for either residents or staff. The main loading and service court is tucked away back here off of the private loop road, so that it is easily screened. It's contained. The architecture will describe it more fully, but it's contained within screen walls adjacent to the building. And we feel that we're meeting the intentions of the connection to the public streets and the vehicle circulation and parking and loading requirements. As it relates to lighting, all of the public and private streets will have streetlights spaced at approximately 80-90 foot harmonic, staggered on each side of the road. That goes for both the private streets as well as the public. And then the private public open spaces or community spaces will also be lit with pedestrian scale lighting to provide the security that's needed. The only other thing that I would want to comment on is that also in this loading area is the primary trash collection, waste disposal area, and all of the waste disposal for the community will be handled by a private vendor and not be reliant on city services.
Okay, good. You heard the representation made by Mr. Bradshaw and by me that this project would cover 125% of the environmental site design of volume on site with respect to stormwater management. Can you explain, and we don't need to get into all the science because it will take some time, but can you give an overview as to how that would be accomplished on this site?
Certainly. Obviously, the primary goal of environmental site design is the way I like to describe it, is that you want to provide treatment for storm runoff as close to the point where the rain hits the ground. And so our approach for this development to meet the city's goals of 125% is to provide a tiered treatment of environmental site design facilities, primarily through the use of a large number of bioretention facilities, either surface or planters, that have been oversized to provide more than 100% treatment on their own. And when I talk about a tiered treatment, that the areas that you see in green are areas of the roof where we have ability to introduce green roof to provide the first layer of stormwater treatment, although from a volume standpoint, green roofs don't contribute as much as the bioretention areas. And you can see, I can zoom in here a little bit. The purple
Just
area,
interrupt you, for the record, this is under our exhibit 6, under tab 6, and it's C-3.00 is what we're looking at right now.
thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
So you can see in purple here, we have 79 bioretention facilities proposed on the project. And with the intention, like, as I said, of those bioretention facilities will provide 120% of the required ESD volume. We talked about the green roof, and then there are some other credits that we can get for the cottages as it relates to roof top and non-rooftop disconnect of paved surfaces and roof areas. And then we also are committed to providing porous pavement for the cottage driveways, but we are not seeking credit for those driveways that we will already have met the 125% goal. But in the event that for some reason those driveways don't percolate over time, we didn't want to just assume that they would always be providing the same level of treatment. So that goes above and beyond the 125% that we're committing to. The other thing that I'd like to point out is that we've talked a lot about the stream restoration, which is 502 feet. This is a channel that's been carved out from untreated runoff from the middle school across Spa Road. And under the old methodology before the adoption of ESD treatment, this type of stream restoration would be counted towards your stormwater obligation by providing, the equivalent of 17,300 cubic feet of water quality treatment. So this is really something that will help improve the quality of Crab Creek and reduce sediment runoff from the eroded channel. All of these elements put together, one other point that I wanted to make, if I can go to the proposed drainage areas. We've strived very hard to
Sorry, now you're at exhibit, still under tab 6, exhibit C 3.03, right?
3.03, yes.
Okay.
Is to honor the existing drainage divides to the 4 points of investigation for the stormwater, so that each area is as close to the size that it is in a pre-developed condition, so that no area is receiving more or less water than what it's experiencing today. We felt that that was important to preserve the hydrology both to the adjacent wetlands and to the areas draining to Crab Creek overall. The net effect of all of these elements is that we are controlling both the 10 and 25-year storm events, so that the post-developed runoff in the model is less than the existing conditions today. So we really feel that what I thought was well, it was a very challenging task when the goal of 125% was introduced. I wasn't exactly sure how we were going to get there, but by providing the maximum ponding depth and maximum media depth and controlling the areas to each of the bioretentions, we were able to really make that impact. And I think that we have a stormwater solution here that I'm proud of, and I think that the city will recognize as really being an enhancement to the environment.
And I suppose this goes without saying, but it does satisfy the requirements of the city code. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Could you explain to the members of the commission what you're doing or what the project proposes to do with respect to tree retention and tree replacement? We talked about the no net loss, and even though Mr. Clavasco is going to get into that detail, that you've been involved in that as well, could you just give a quick overview of that? And that's,
sure.
Look at FCP
This is
-4, which is also contained within our tab 6.
And I'll let Mr. Clavasco get into some of the more forest-related elements of his testimony. But what this exhibit here shows is that the developable area that is shown here in the center we will be clearing 27.3 acres of trees to accommodate the development. Again, it's all nestled up here against Forest Drive and away from the sensitive areas that will be preserved towards the rear of the property. Excuse me. What you see in orange are the areas that we will be either afforesting in the context that it's not currently forested, or as it relates to some of the areas adjacent to the development, reforesting areas that will be cleared as part of the development. And one of the embellishments that we have is that there are some pockets of area that are currently not forested within the critical area. And so even though there is no development proposed in the critical area, we will be planting some of these areas to enhance the critical area through the reforestation. The bulk of the reforestation area is shown here in the back. But the bottom line is that the sum of all of these orange areas is going to be, I don't want to misspeak, 23.9 acres. And then to supplement that, as provided for in the code, we're proposing to plant 195 street trees, which when they reach their mature canopy will provide an additional 3.5 acres of trees, meeting our 27.3, 27.4 acres of required replanting to meet the no net loss obligation. The one thing that I want to say on this subject in closing is that we also will be planting 216 shade trees and 125 ornamental trees as landscape plantings outside of the street section that are not eligible to be counted towards forest conservation. But the additional 300 landscape trees, 300 plus landscape trees really help go towards meeting the city master plan goal of reaching a 50% overall tree canopy goal.
And I want the record to reflect that you're now looking at under tab 6, exhibit L7.11, correct?
Yes, and the street tree planting was L710.
Okay, good.
What is this? What is this exhibit?
This
Can't see
is,
it. Can you enlarge it significantly? What is it?
This is a planting plan. It's a little hard to discern, but the street trees, as you'll see here, are a little grayed out. They're not included in the counting of landscape trees that will be planted throughout the community that are above and beyond the street trees that we're proposing, the normal landscaping that the community, the residents will enjoy as part of their open space experience.
Mr. Johnson, thank you for that. You also prepared a preliminary subdivision plat, is that correct?
Yes. Whoops, hold on, sorry. My cursor is getting in the way of, not quite sure how to do this. I did, I apologize, I can't get to that drawing right now. This subdivision plan is part of this is C001 again, but the information shown here is the same as what's on the record plat. The plat was prepared and identifies the proposed street network, the 7 lots, along with their sizes, bearings, and distances, and along with the other supporting documents, meet the requirements for finding approval of the preliminary record plat.
And that's section 20.12 of the city code. It satisfies those requirements in the city code.
Yes.
Okay, all right. And then overall, do you believe that there's been a minimization of impacts to the property and maximizing the natural resource protection? We all say it, but from an engineering point of view, do you believe that is the case?
Yes, I think as required under section 2122 080 book D&E, careful consideration has been given to the placement of the buildings, and with multiple iterations and cooperation with staff, we've arrived at these solutions to minimize the impact to the adjacent wetland area and the tributary headwaters to Crab Creek. The alignment of Skipper's Lane, which was a master planned relief road, the alignment and horizontal location of that was carefully crafted with staff to one, roughly align with the existing county force main that bisects the property, as well as setting the two terminus points, one such that it would align with a future projection from Gemini further to the east. And we've talked about the additional connection of Skipper's Lane to the north and west to connect to Newtown. So by congregating the development in this zone, we've minimized the impact to the lower half of the property. We still are maintaining a generous buffer up against Forest Drive that in the case where we're preserving the existing grade, will be providing invasive species management to get rid of some of the unwanted plantings and supplement that area with more native natural species. And in the case of the office building and its parking, that area will be reforested so as to make a continuous green buffer along Forest Drive. I think that while shielding it from the traveling public on Forest, once you enter the community, that the circulation, the open space, all will be very inviting and accessible to the community. And I think that this organization is efficient and really has optimized all of the goals as far as natural resource protection while still meeting the development goals of the project. I don't believe that the project will have a greater impact on the surrounding area compared to any other development that would have been allowed under the zones allowed under a more standard method than this plan development.
Thank you. How about the fact is there's a requirement for plan developments that they have to satisfy the standards on bulk and density. We have an institution for care of the aged, so it's not so many units per acre, but do we satisfy the bulk and density requirements of the code?
In my opinion, we do. Essentially part of this process of a plan development is that the bulk density, the stuff you would normally see for allowable FAR, number of units, what have you, our setbacks are determined by this planning commission approval that are setting the standards for the development. And so, for example, we meet the requirements, but have brought the buildings up to the street to create that urban edge, which again provides a compact footprint. And so we adhere to the bulk standards that we create through this development and what is subsequently approved as part of this commission finding. But we meet the requirements of the R3, R2, and P districts for the various zoning requirements.
Just by way of explanation to the planning commission, an institution for care of the aged is a special exception in all these different districts. It's not like it's a multifamily or apartments or townhouses that's calculated so many units per acre. And we're dealing with FAR requirements, and we far below the FAR maximum. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So in addition to everything else that you've done, you also prepared the application package for adequacy of public facilities. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that's also contained under our Exhibit 6. And that is a necessary requirement anytime a plan development application is submitted. Could you take a moment and really briefly describe for the Planning Commission the features of the APF, or Adequate Public Facilities Study,
Sure.
and your conclusions that you reached?
Try not to get too detailed on this. And I believe we have a certificate of finding of adequate public facility. As it relates to fire emergency services, all of the buildings will be fully sprinkled so that we'll meet the obligation under section 1712.010. The 2 points of access in the fire department access plan demonstrate that we meet the requirements for fire and emergency services access and circulation. The project is approximately a half mile from the fire department at 1790 Forest Drive. So it's my understanding that response times are adequate, and from the flow test data that we provided to the city, we have adequate flow and pressure to meet the requirements for fire protection. As it relates to adequate police protection, through the nature of the use, we don't feel that there's should be a great demand on police response, but we meet the requirement of police response time. We noted their issue or concern that to make sure that we adequately light parking and other community spaces to provide adequate security, and we will ensure that we meet appropriate light levels at the time of final permit. When we talk about adequate public maintenance services, we talked about the dedication of the public streets, which will be turned over to the city for maintenance upon completion. Otherwise, the public or the private street network will be maintained by the applicant. As it relates to adequate water and sewer, the project, there's a 16-inch water line in Forest Drive that we will be connecting to, as well as we will be extending that down to loop the system to the connection at Spa and Skippers. The project will be designed to have a gravity sewer system that will be extended down Spa Road. I can bring up the fuller plan down to connect to the gravity sewer going to Harness Creek and ultimately to the city pumping station at Harness Creek. So we have adequate water and sewer capacity. The use is exempt from adequate recreational facilities as Institute for the Care of the Aged, but would note that the Truxton Community Park is located within a half mile of the project. One of the things that we haven't spoken about is that Skippers Lane will have a 5-foot continuous bike lane on going in each direction. And there will be connections with a shared street up to Forest Drive. We are proposing to construct a 10-foot shared use path along the entire project frontage, including down to the connection at Hunt Meadow, if I have that correctly. So we believe that from a non-auto transportation facility, we're really enhancing the bike network throughout the community. And there are provisions to provide a bus stop on Skipper's Lane to promote the public transit connection. We went through stormwater, so I feel that we meet the requirement for adequate stormwater facilities. And as a facility for care of the aged, there's no demand on local schools. So we will be exempt from those requirements.
All right, so just to have you conclude, the project has to meet a number of city code standards, across the board and across the areas of your discipline. And in your opinion, does it meet all of the city code requirements?
Not to belabor the final four, but as outlined in the commitments in the letters to Dr. Nash and Mr. Weingrad, we're meeting the requirements for no net loss, the stormwater management, traffic. And in my opinion, this plan development meets or exceeds all of the required code standards of the city and the goals of the master plan. And I think when we're finished, this is a project that we can all be proud of.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, that would conclude my questions for Mr. Johnson at this time. And I think Mr. Smith was going to do some follow-up.
Over to staff. Thank you. Staff.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, sorry, I had to unmute myself. I would concur with Mr. Johnson's findings as related to adequate public facilities. I don't normally like to speak for public works, but they did find the stormwater management, the water, sewer, and road maintenance meeting or exceeding the code requirements, thus adequate for public facilities approval. I would like to just take a moment to talk about that. The engineering design for a project like this, it's not a separate element. It's really a dual or even triple design element in conjunction with the environmental impacts and the overall landscape. When Mr. Johnson spoke to the drainage areas, honoring or mimicking the existing drainage patterns, that's very significant. As the city has learned over the last 30 years of development in this area, the soils are very sensitive. And thus, if you alter drainage areas, you alter wet soils and wetlands, which we have quite a bit of on this site, as you've seen within the plans. So it wasn't just an engineering task, it was an environmental task coupled to mimic those to make sure we weren't increasing water to wetlands or thus draining water to wetlands, or as far as the vernal pool goes, ensuring we weren't increasing water temperatures that were draining to those areas, which would impact amphibious life that breed in those areas. So in addition, the stream channel restoration that Mr. Johnson mentioned, that I know Mr. Klobasco is going to go into, I received since the beginning of this project numerous calls from residents, both city and county, that live in this area that talked about the water drainage from the middle school for 30 years has been a problem. They would send me photographs of sediment plumes after each rain into the creek. So the city asked of National Lutheran if they would look into this issue. It's not a requirement in the city code. And once again, National Lutheran said, yes, let us take a look at this issue and let us see if we can participate and help this scenario. Being on site, I know Mr. Klobasco is going to get into this in just a moment, but some of the cut is almost 8 feet deep. The erosion is significant. So I don't want to belittle the issue of the stream restoration. And it's my understanding that that's close to a $500,000 commitment for National Lutheran that they really are making at the request of the city, not as a requirement of the city code. That's all I'll say on this issue.
Mr. Smith?
Yes, sir.
All right. The applicant sort of has jumped into a number of details and thrown up some maps that are not easy to see on screen sharing, but would you mind, are you able to like put up a map of your own that, and take us through some of just how things are laid out, what some of the high points are, some of the decisions that were made. Talk about like the sidewalk path along for, help us through this in terms of how the place is organized and what you think about it. Is this an appropriate time to do that?
That's exactly what I wanted to do, Bob. So please, that's exactly what we want.
Sure. If I could, as far as sharing screen, because it's not easy for me to do. Could I ask for Mr. Johnson if he would put the site plan up, or Mr. Hyatt, and maybe even help me with the cursor? And I'll be happy to go through some of the elements.
I'd be happy to put up. Which file do you want put up? You know, I was about to do that myself. Okay.
I think that image that was just there briefly might be a good starting point.
And then enlarge it because it's tiny and he's got all that periphery on it. So let's really see what's going on.
So if I was going to get into this in more detail in the discussion during the environmental section, but I'm happy to get into it now. So when Mr. Bradshaw came back to the city as wanting to develop it as a total institution for the care of the aged and not as a mixed-use development project and take it over, we literally started from square one, from zero. We started with the natural resources inventory, and frankly, the State Forest Conservation Act really ought to be named a Natural Resources Inventory Act, because it's not just about trees. It's more about the preservation of sensitive environmental elements as it is about trees. So we worked with the Annapolis Environmental Commission, a number of other environmentalists and environmental organizations and arborists and nationally recognized landscape architects like Mr. Urban, and helped the applicant to identify the most sensitive areas of the site within what is the code calls all priority forest areas. And we utilized what we landscape architects call bubble diagrams. We literally got trace paper and Sharpies and began to identify from that natural resources inventory what were the most sensitive areas on site, be it wetlands, vernal pools, be it hydric soils, and so forth, areas that we would direct development to that were not sensitive, as other areas that were extremely sensitive. Mr. Johnson also spoke to two elements, one being the existing county forest main. And if Mr. Johnson, you'd follow your cursor from Forest Drive down existing Crystal Spring Farm Drive, that forest main then makes a right angle and runs straight through the site to Spa Road. So you cannot build over that. That area would need to be accessed for maintenance, and it's an awfully large, and Mr. Johnson, correct me, I believe it's a 60-inch forest main. That began to be a bit of a driver for where to locate the road, as well as the development around the road. And the second part of that is looking at the city's comprehensive plan for what is now really called the Relief Road, and extending Skipper's Lane from the very west at Newtown Drive over to an ultimate connection to Gemini. So that began to set what I'll call the spine of the project. Also in that area, if you were to look at existing grades, is really the highest point of the site. There's sort of a man-made elevation up around grade 60, which is almost some bermed up elevation, almost 20 feet higher than some of the grades around it. And what we know from previous experience and just in generally is the preservation of trees on wet soils and wet areas is quite difficult in lower elevations. So those became higher sensitive areas to save. Again, driving development towards this high point area, in addition to the comprehensive plan, in addition to the forest main, really began to set, this is where the development belongs. It's also the furthest away from the creek, the ultimate sensitive area, creek being Crab Creek, which then drains into the South River. So part of the goal was, even though the institutional living building is a large building, we reduced the footprint, and Mr. Bradshaw can correct me, by at least 30% originally, and connected all of what in some of their other projects are separate elements, be it the healthcare, be it the chapel, and kept shrinking its footprint down to what we wanted to be, with cottages and Maison Courts, as if they were literally dropped into the forest. Staff with its arborist and prior staff, such as Alderman Savage and prior planning commissioners such as Jim Urban, we visited this site probably 24 times. And every time you're there, you learn something a little bit more. When I say attention to detail, you're seeing some individual specimen trees on here, but we looked at all sorts of trees and all sorts of sizes and healths and conditions. Every building that's located here is very purposefully located for that environment. In talking to context on Annapolis as a whole, the cottages that front on Skipper's Lane Extended, you'll notice, are all rear loaded. So we wanted to maintain Annapolis context of front porch architecture and rear loaded garages. So there are no garages facing the street. It's really a human element to the street. We think that actually worked out pretty well from an environmental standpoint as well as a contextual standpoint. All of the parking, primarily for the user. Now there is some visitor parking, perhaps a little bit of employee parking, is almost all underneath the IL building and all underneath of the Maison Court building. So when you look at your site plan, you're not seeing a great deal. In fact, you're seeing a very limited amount of surface parking. So in far as the stormwater management goes, Mr. Johnson is correct. It is definitely a layered or tiered system, starting with green roofs, starting to putting rain gardens as close to rooftops as they can be, and tiering that system down. Working it into the overall landscaping. Again, it's not a separate element. It's environmentally driven, it's engineering driven, and it's aesthetically driven. There was at one time in front of the Maison Courts, and by in front, I mean between the Maison Courts and Forest Drive, where today there is an office building, a smaller office building, and a residence. There were duplexes located in that area. And they honestly didn't work within the site plan very well, even adjusting their locations numerous times. They were finally removed, and we actually added a story to both Maison Courts. Instead of 3 stories, they became 4 stories. And what you have now between the Maison Courts and Forest Drive, between the existing forest and forest that will be replanted when we remove the office buildings, is close to 300 feet. What we also requested of Mr. Klobasco and Mr. Bradshaw was, can we look at the existing forest within the limited disturbance of these buildings and look at trees that we think are of size and health that would qualify to transplant before we cut them all down and put them in that buffer adjacent to Forest Drive. So what you would have is really a very established 300-foot forested buffer. And they agreed to do that. We have done that with a project or two in the past in the city, and it's been fairly successful. You have to have a really good arborist and a lot of patience, honestly. One of the other items that we thought from a connectivity standpoint, and if you look at the shared use path today that the county established on Forest Drive in front of the Safeway and Village Greens, it sets back off of the curb line. We all know Forest Drive has a high volume of traffic, but it also has a high speed of traffic and is not comfortable as a pedestrian or a cyclist adjacent to it. But if you look at the shared use paths today, you'll see a fair amount of users, moms pushing strollers, people on bikes. So we asked to continue that shared use path and remove the existing sidewalk along Forest Drive, pull it back, and continue it not only down Forest Drive, but all the way down Spa Road to the entrance to Hunt Meadow. So begin to make true connectivity for people who want to take their bicycles or run or jog where they feel comfortable and safe in doing so. And with the Skipper Drive connection that will, as Mr. and I'm skipping around a little bit, as Mr. Johnson spoke to, through this property that National Lutheran will build, also contribute the piece behind American Legion. When it is connected, I honestly don't know how many thousands of homes are down Spa Road in Harness Creek, but I do know between Newtown Drive, Greenbrier Lane, and Bywater Road, i.e. Childs Point Road, there's about 1,800 units. All of those now do not have to go, or now with the design and the connection, will not have to access Forest Drive for services. So if you live down Harness Creek or in Hunt Meadows, you can now come down Skipper Lane and shortly in the future down there and access a grocery store, the bank, a pharmacy, restaurants, doctor's offices, and so forth without ever having to go onto Forest Drive. So those are some of the big drivers in the design. Commissioner Wallman, I can get into the minutia of the detail for you if you'd like. I also neglected to talk about the existing facilities. The horse farm that's there today is a therapeutic riding facility. And I don't want to speak on behalf of the property owner and what all it provides to the community and those users for that. That will all be maintained in perpetuity. What's also on site today is an existing old farmhouse that's utilized as the wellness center. And Miss Richardson Pearson's generosity, she's donating 2.5 acres adjacent to Spa Road in what is currently an open field for a future wellness house to be constructed there in a new facility. And I don't have to tell you the benefits for the community from the wellness house, for the cancer patients and their families who are working with their loved ones who have cancer. So kudos in that regard. Would you like more detail, Commissioner Wallman?
Well, here's a couple of questions. They range pretty far afield. The little thing, the sort of circle of forest behind the cottages inside the loop.
Yeah, right where it says Lot 5.
Yes.
So
I mean, those cottages are impinging on that. Is enough of it left for it to be healthy?
Yes, sir. If you were to overlay that on the natural resources inventory, you'll see a highlighted bubble area on the natural resources inventory that talks about a high priority forest save area. It's got some very quality trees from a forest standpoint, with a canopy forest and understory forest in that area. And we've actually expanded upon that, which is why that area has been preserved, because it was identified as a high priority save area. So we frankly worked around it. We also felt like it really wasn't the best cohesion connectedness between 1-story cottages and a 4- and 5-story institutional building to be located across the street from each other. So it has this buffering between the two, if you will, where there is an adjacent, I'll call it Unit 30 to the IL pieces. Those are the smaller 1- and 2-story elements of the health wing there, which does make contextually a better relationship, if you will. So there were architectural reasons, but primarily environmental reasons for that area to be preserved.
Okay, so my question is what's left large enough to continue to maintain its health?
Yes, we certainly feel that is. It can be a sustainable area. It's large enough. And not that you might have some element on the edge of dieback as you typically do. But again, I bet Mr. Johnson, he can jump in here. I bet we asked him to regrade that area a dozen times. And each time shrinking the footprint, moving the storm drain and utilities to maximize the tree save and the sensitivity to the trees from being on site and using the natural resources inventory collectively. So yes, I feel pretty confident about the tree save there.
Okay, I'd like to move up to the grading behind the Maison Courts. They back up into he mentioned that it's pretty high between those Maison Courts and
Yes.
Forest Drive. So it's not only 200 feet or so, it's also a higher grade.
So yes, if you can look at the existing dashed lines there, those represent existing grade elevations. And you see lots of horizontal solid lines there behind a very dark line, which is a retaining wall. So what we wanted to do is keep that existing elevation that is higher with all the forest that's on it with a retaining wall, and then grade it down to the level where the Maison Courts would then, if you will, fit into the hillside, so to speak. Have a relationship with Skipper Lane extended with the use of a retaining wall, retain as much forest in that area as we can. And then, of course, the office building that's there will be reforested with trees relocated from on site.
Okay, and just tell us a little bit about that the height of that, because that's a visual and a sound barrier to Forest Drive.
If I recall, you can see a little bit of the dashed lines, and I'm sorry I can't put it, but Kevin's got the pointer, elevation 60. I think it goes up as high as elevation 70 in the very center of the berm. And Kevin, help me with the first floor elevations are at 51. So it's about 20 feet to the top of that berm from the first floor of those buildings. So yes, not only are you getting a visual barrier from Forest Drive, you're not going to see these 4-story buildings from Forest Drive. You're also getting some sound buffering in there as well.
Okay, and then it drops down pretty sharply down to Crystal Farm Springs Road.
Well, then it's very handicapped and pedestrian friendly. The first floor elevations are set close to street grade elevations. Kevin, if you go back to Skipper's Lane, so being an institution for the care of the aged, sidewalk grades and road grades and those things were very carefully looked at from a handicapped accessibility standpoint. So there really are no excessive grades when it comes to sidewalks and street grades here.
Okay. So and how how many stories is the main building?
The main building is if I recall, it's 4 stories on the front and 5 stories on the rear.
So
because the grade drops off.
If you're standing on, say, on the sidewalk on the other side of Forest Drive, will you be able to see the top of that building, do you think?
No, sir. I don't believe you're going to see that building with 300 feet of forest between Forest Drive and any of these buildings. I don't recall the height off the top of my head. I know at the next commission meeting, when we get into the architecture with Mr. Campbell.
It's about 70 feet, I think, was the roof line on the highest building.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. And you're talking existing forest at 60 or 70 feet high, plus they're already almost 20 feet, 15 to 20 feet higher already. So again, that's why we state for the record that you're really not going to see these buildings from Forest Drive.
Okay.
And the roundabout that you see with Crystal Spring Farm Drive and Skipper's Lane is obviously a throw to how roundabouts work in the city of Annapolis. And we thought it was important to also contextually add that element instead of having a stop sign.
Oh, I think it's a great idea. I think given the amount of traffic, which is not going to be huge, I think it's a perfect way to distribute it.
I think you also achieve a bit of a hierarchy in the road system there. And it also creates a good sense of identity and place and center to the project. These roundabouts, just as Church Circle and Westgate Circle do for us today.
Okay, could you
So
go
that's,
back up to Forest Drive? Yeah, let's take a look at that, you say it's an 8-foot or 10-foot wide asphalt path all along
10
Forest
foot
Drive?
wide shared use trail, yes. So we'll be removing the existing 4-foot wide concrete sidewalk that's adjacent to the curb. And for the most part, pulling this off the curb. There are some areas where it is still adjacent to the curb. There are telephone poles and all that have to be worked with there. But for the most part, widening it, if anybody's used a shared use trail on a bicycle, 8 to 10 feet is really a comfortable width. Anything less is just not comfortable for two-way bike traffic with pedestrians and so forth.
For context, something like the B&A trail is 10 feet.
Exactly. So the applicant was kind enough to agree to do the 10-foot shared use trail, which we're actually quite excited about.
And it's a little tough to tell from this diagram, but the shared use trail that's closer down towards the Safeway that's existing has about a 4-foot grass buffer from the curb to the edge of the trail. Are the spots where it's pulled away from the road here at least 4 feet? And it looks like maybe off to the left.
Yeah,
There's
I
a
would
couple of
say
spots where you're constrained that.
there are places,
less than
yes, Commissioner Pline, where it is constrained and it touches the curb. And there are areas, as you can see currently, where Mr. Johnson's showing, it is actually exceeds 4 feet. Some places it's 10 feet or more. Just working around existing objects adjacent to Forest Drive.
And so I don't mean to take the gavel here from you, Bob, if you're still working through some questions.
No, go on.
But with respect to the path, and this is probably a question for Mr. Lashinsky, but where if you scroll over to the right some more, where it starts to curve around to Spa Road, the question I have is what's anticipated, as the shared use path slowly gets built farther down Forest Drive, where's it anticipated that it would continue on the other side of Spa Road? More or less paralleling Old Forest Drive versus continuing it right up against Forest Drive on the other side of Spa Road? Do you have any sense?
Commissioner Klein, I'd hate to speculate. I actually do have.
Well, I'm just thinking Mr. Lashinsky might know,
as a
and
witness
that's
for us. I know he's
okay.
going to. I don't know if he's going to be speaking this evening,
Okay.
but I know he is on this evening. If he would care to answer that now, or we can answer it when it's his turn to speak.
Wouldn't it make sense to bring it down to the spur that's going to go to Gemini, though? It's safer.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's some consideration for that, and rather than us speculating, I was just curious if somebody on staff wanted to weigh in just to answer that question. I suspect that it would more or less parallel Old Forest Drive because that's where the likely right of way is.
I would just say we don't have a specific plan currently, but that would be the most sensible for it to follow Old Forest across Spa there.
Right, because I mean, kind of what I'm getting is that I wouldn't want us to make a choice here that made doing something later hard. And if we sort of have a sense for where that's going literally, we can make sure that this dovetails well, because now's our chance to affect that. But given that that's not really determined, just leave it at that. And the other thing I had was with respect to Skipper's Lane and really the loop road, all the roads from what I was able to see from the plans, the travel lanes in all of those interior roads are 12 feet. And if I misread that from the plans, please correct me. But Skipper's Lane also has a 5-foot bike lane in addition to the 12 feet. And, to me, 12 feet is, that's a lane on Forest Drive is 12 feet. So if you're anticipating, as you mentioned, Mr. Smith, that, people coming out of Hunt Meadow are going to go through here to get to the shopping centers farther down on the other side of Skipper's Lane, A 12-foot lane is, you could drive easily 40 miles an hour on a 12-foot lane. And I guess the question I have is the choice of a 12-foot lane driven by a public works requirement, or is that just something that said, oh, okay, we'll make it a standard 12-feet lane? I mean, I think a slow speed street, even 10 feet's a little much, but 10 would be much more, would have a bit more friction than 12. And, my guess is driving 25 miles an hour in a 12-foot lane is pretty hard to do especially if you're not paying attention. So something I would, I'd rather take some of that lane and make, instead of a 6-foot sidewalk, make it an 8-foot sidewalk. I think so. If that's not a requirement that's driven by Public Works, and it was just sort of an arbitrary choice, I think that should have some more discussion about that.
It was an arbitrary choice. I believe it is. It was a request of Public Works. And, you being someone who certainly commutes on a bicycle knows very well how streets function. But the combination of the streets, you have bike lanes, you have parallel parking within this, what we call sort of the urban section, and street trees against the sidewalk, creating an overhead plane, thus the complete street. I would think you would feel more like a residential street than any sort of a thoroughfare type of street. At least that's our intention.
With 17 feet of pavement, because you really have to include the bike lane because it's just a painted line. But with essentially a line that's 17 feet of pavement, I guarantee you in a couple of years, you're going to have people screaming for traffic humps, for traffic calming. And I mean, because we see this everywhere in the city, even in West Annapolis, where we have 10-foot lanes, people still go 45 miles an hour. So it just seems, plus, it's, if you make them narrower, it's a lot less pavement you have to redo every 20 years. So I would just urge you all to think about, do you really want 12-foot lanes? Because I think that's going to cause problems, especially if people, as you sort of hint at, I know people hate this term as a cut through, but, as an alternative to going out on Forest Drive, people trying to get to the CVS quicker, it just gives me a 12-foot lane there, just gives me the willies. So something to think about.
Point well taken.
Is the Department of Public Works dug in their heels on this? Or are they amenable to suggestions, as they say?
Probably not, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I can't. I don't want to speak for them, Commissioner Wallman. But as you know, in recent projects, they have been amenable to working with the applicant for design alternatives.
Well, okay. I think what Alex's comments are striking a chord with me. I think that he's probably right, that actually shrinking the street will actually calm it.
Absolutely.
All right. I mean, I do think that, and by the way, in terms of what the commission is being asked to review and decide upon, it's a preliminary plat, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so things like street widths and so forth, are they part of the preliminary plat? Or is it simply a change to the property lines?
Plat dedicates the width of the right of way.
Okay.
The road is more driven by the site plan you're seeing here and the engineering.
Okay. All right. But so it could change between now and the final plat if it gets to us, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
I wouldn't have any issue. I wouldn't have any issues with the right of way.
I think that's a very wise suggestion of Mr. Plines. I think he's probably on the right track.
Right, but the right of way could stay the same as, as far as the plat.
The right of way could stay the same, but I think shrinking the size of that street may make some sense. I don't know. You're much closer to the details of the sidewalks, the parking areas, where the trees go. I mean, we're not getting into that level of detail tonight. you could answer that question better, but it resonates with me. That's just me. Anyway, I think I don't have any more questions based upon what Mr. Johnson provided.
Yep, same here.
You know,
And,
let me just
I don't-
weigh in real quick. We did try for 10-foot lane width, and Public Works did come back at 12. So it's still, it can be subject to some further discussion, but
Yes,
that's exactly what happened.
I can't say I'm shocked.
Well, it's a very interesting question, Mr. Hyatt, whether the Planning Commission can override a decision of the Department of Public Works. And I'd like a memo on that, maybe by Monday morning.
By Tuesday, yes, sir.
All right.
Okay.
Any other commissioners before I go, or?
I just have a quick, more of, not a suggestion, but I just really want to point out what a great job Tom has done. Because, you know, there was an intermittent stream that was largely going to be damaged from some of the earlier plans, and we did a great job. Tom did a great job and staff of making sure that the plan actually got moved north of the intermittent stream and concentrated up there, which is a great advantage for the water quality for Crab Creek and protecting the vernal pool and all the isolated wetlands. So I just want to thank you again, Tom, for being so diligent and protecting those natural assets and making this plan work. I mean, there's obviously more to talk about, but just as Mr. Johnson went through those environmental features, it brought back a lot of memories of my conversations with you and other staff members on the stormwater issues. So I just want to say thank you. It's a great, great plan from an environmental perspective from what I can see right now. That's it.
I'd like to think the plan, it drives itself. Thank you.
Okay, could you stop share, please? I will.
So, Mr. Chairman, it's about 9:30.
Yep.
And given the lateness of the hour, if it's acceptable to you, I would suggest that it would be appropriate for Mr. Weingrad to speak at this time instead of waiting until after our next witness, because it may get to be too late at that point in time.
Got it. So
That's
I
okay with you. That's okay with me.
will ask my questions now, and we'll get through those. And
Okay.
then we can have Mr. Weingrad speak for his 10 to 15 minutes at most. And then after that, we'll probably be running out of time to continue at that point, but we'll see. But I have a few questions, so we'll go back to that. Mine are more basic, and this will be faster than the other commissioners, I believe. So I'll make it 5 or less. So in essence, for the members of the public out there, we're taking this property here all the way down and developing the front half. As Tom stated, the property elevations and everything lends you to want to put the more urban type of architecture up to the front and keeping everything in the back. 120 acres being kept by the farm owner, roughly 120 acres down here at the Masqué Farm. And how, Tom, is that going to stay in the future? What restrictions are put upon that farm for future development? And also what restrictions are put upon this forested area all the way to the creek to keep that? Make it quick and easy for the public to understand, please.
Sure. And just quickly, the Masqué Farm, the horse farm area that you mentioned, that's in a part of a 75-acre conservation easement that Miss Richardson Pearson agreed to dedicate as part of the annexation. So it has limitations within it. Within that easement details itself as to how the horse farm can be expanded. But as far as the forested piece adjacent to that, that'll all be in a forest conservation easement that all gets dedicated to the Scenic Rivers Land Trust.
And if it gets dedicated to the Scenic Rivers Land Trust, what can they do with it? Can they turn it into a park?
It stays as forest in perpetuity.
What about putting park trails through it and access for people in the future? Is that a possibility?
I don't believe that's in there. There are trails within it for the institutional use in and of itself, and they are limited. because we, again, want to be sensitive to the site, but no trails for public access.
Not now, but as future, has there been any talk by the trust, the River Trust or anything is making that accessible or no?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, because I'm wondering what really happens to this stuff that gets put in perpetuity.
Well, the intention is truly preservation. And I know Mr. Weingrad, when he's going to speak, who spent numerous hours either drafting or redrafting or editing,
Right.
as well as the Scenic Rivers Land Trust. That's a document with our Office of Law that has been well read.
Okay, but and last question, maybe I'm beating the dead horse with you, but is there anyone in the future that's going to talk tonight or in the future nights about that subject? And what, I mean, is there any plan, anybody talked about using it? Because I know in past meetings, past developments, people have talked about wanting the public to be able to use some of these forested areas. I'm not trying to push it. I'm just wondering what's happening with that? No, or yay, or maybe, or we haven't decided.
We can get into the details if you'd like at future meetings of these conservation easements, if that's your desire.
I just want to know if there's anything else to it, or it's just going to stay as a forest that's not developed to have anyone have trails through it, or bike trails or horse trails or anything else. That's
My
kind of what I'm
understanding
wondering.
is it's intended to be left in its either existing forested state or the open fields that'll be afforested in that forested state.
Okay.
in perpetuity.
Mr. Hyatt, is there anything to add to that, or?
I think that Mr. Smith is correct. I think the idea is to keep it natural, passive, not disturbed. That's the point.
Okay. All right. That gets it for me. Thank you. Up here at we're going to be removing this building and this structure as well. On some of the drawings, like the drawing you just showed, it still shows those buildings on there and the engineering drawing with the parking lots, but those are being removed, correct?
That's correct. And there's one other residence at the corner with Forest Drive and Crystal Spring Farm Road. So there's 3 structures on Forest Drive that will be removed and reforested.
Showing 2 up here roughly, but okay.
Right at the corner of Forest Drive and Crystal Springs Farm Road is a small little square right there. It's a
Right
small
there.
little square. That's an existing residence there.
Okay, and those will be reforested areas, so there will be that 300-foot forest buffer won't exist for some time as this is replanted. So there will be some visual to the buildings, I noticed, when Mr. Waldman asked earlier, but that's understandable. I get that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I stated, that's one of the reasons why we're working with the applicant's arborists to take trees from on-site and relocate them in those areas, so you get more of an instant forest, if you will, rather than using nursery stock, smaller trees to reforest that area.
All right, and if you see me flailing, that's because my computer is about to run out of battery power, so I'm hooking up the cord, which is a good thing for you. Okay, so that answers that question. The connection to the community to the west, the Newtown area, and then also to the east. You talked about the 12-foot lanes, and there's also, I noticed, parking spaces, parallel parking spaces down a lot of that road with the 12-foot lanes. Is that correct?
In the center portion, yes, it's a bit more of an urban street with on-street parking, yes.
Right, so I'm thinking those 12 larger lanes, why smaller? So when people are getting in and out of cars, that might be a better thing. I'm guessing that's why Public Works would be requiring that, but I don't know, debatable for the future. Looking at traffic flow for people going through the neighborhood and walkers from school, the sidewalks on the north and south side of Skipper's Lane, how wide are those going to be, Mr. Johnson? And are they going to be adjoining the street or slightly offset?
They'll be adjacent to the curb in the areas where there is the parallel parking. Where there isn't the parallel parking, there will be the green lawn panel with street trees separating the sidewalk from the travel way. I believe that the sidewalks are 6 feet in width, but maybe somebody could confirm that for me.
What's being done to ensure the health of those trees, those street trees, or because you're making a considerable investment in street trees all along Skipper Lane. What's going to be done to ensure that the proper and sufficient volume of soils is going to be there?
Mr. Pelosi, our landscape architect.
Okay, fine. I'll wait.
But the bottom line is that, you know, the mixture of on-site topsoil and the existing soil profile will be maintained so that the native tree species that are used to this environment, coupled with, I mean, it's a generous lawn panel, but all of that will be reconditioned so as to promote the success of the street trees.
Yeah, the landscape architect's the guy to ask that, to answer that. Great,
That'll be up next.
great, thanks.
And the sidewalks you said were some adjacent and some not, and we have rear loading structures, so we would expect the residents to pull around back, which is good in keeping the street free flowing for traffic. The last question I have is more of a general question. I'll stop share here and go back to the, probably should ask this one first. The zoning R2 and R3 was mentioned is right up here near the road. Is that correct still?
Yes, there are portions of the site that are different residential zones. And then the office building that you see there is a triangular piece that's zone P for professional office.
Yeah, I believe in the comp plan when we, about 3 years ago, we went through this area and we were looking at, obviously looking towards more urban close up to the street. So the special exception you're asking for use on top of the R2, R3, for anybody that's worried about it online, in the comp plan, we've already kind of planned to change the zoning of this anyway. Correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, but I believe that's the case.
I don't know that it quote changes the zoning, Mr. Chairman, but through plan development, as Mr. Hyatt said, this is a special exception use, which is allowed in all of those zones as a special exception currently.
Do you have to go to the Board of Appeals to get the special exception?
No, sir. It's part and parcel of the plan development review.
Okay.
Well, we grant that special exception, right?
Well, again, and Mr. Hyatt can jump in from the legal standpoint here, but yes, the plan development really includes the use within the plan development request.
Okay.
And we approve or deny that based on, okay. But just to make a note, I do remember distinctly in the comp plan for the next iteration that we're pushing to make this more urban, vice the R2, R3 and things we kind of saw up here. So it fits in with what our future comp plan direction was going for this area. That's my point. Okay, that's all the questions I have based on what the initial briefer had. And that gives us another section of time to go to Mr. Weingrad, unless there's any other commissioners that have last minute questions they might have thought of for the current briefer. Okay, well then we'll, Mr. Hyatt, if you're comfortable, we'll open up public testimony here. You comfortable moving to that?
Yeah, we're going to take one member of the public out of order here, as we said, and instead of waiting until another witness, which may get us too late, I would rather proceed with Mr. Weingrad at this time.
Okay, so members of the public, as the chairman, we're going to open up public testimony right now, so we can get in one of our community members who's played an important role in this project for quite some time and represents quite a few people. So I will now open up public testimony, and we will let Mr. Weingrad take the next 10 to 15 to promote whatever he has to say. And Mr. Weingrad, please espouse upon who you're representing, what groups, how many people, and also, I mean, make it brief, of course, and how long you've been working with the project to try to come to what we've come to. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Gerald Weingrad, and can you all hear me and see me?
Yes, you sure can. Go ahead.
I represent a group called Concerned Citizens for Proper Land Use Incorporated. We're a nonprofit. We were incorporated during this process. We've been in existence since 2013, when unfortunately for me, I joined the fray in this battle over the development of this property, this 176-acre property. I'm an attorney, retired, and have devoted quite a bit of time trying to work with the city, the owners, the developers, and the many citizens that were opposed to this project to work on it
out an amicable and solid solution.
Could you give your residence, please?
I live in Oyster Harbor at 1328 Washington Drive, Annapolis 21403. I've lived in the city limits of Annapolis, downtown, and Murray Hill, Vineyard Road off of Forest Drive since 1946, and have lived here for the last 24 years. So our group is composed of a lot of leaders in environmental groups as well as private citizens. And we have worked on this project with the city, as I said, and the developers, the various ones, including from Connecticut. We've been before the Planning Commission before, three of us, one representing traffic issues, Greg Walker, Jim Urban, who's part of our group, was representing the urban forestry and planning. He was the chairman of the Planning Commission for 10 years. And I was representing the overall environmental impacts and site design. That was back in 2015. Planning Commission had work sessions, other work sessions with the developers, 2 in 2011, 1 in 2015, and another in 2018. So this is 5 times the Planning Commission has heard about this development before tonight. So what I wanted, the key points that I'm going to make are that we have worked with Larry Bradshaw at National Lutheran and with Tom Smith and various other folks at the city collaboratively over the last few years instead of confrontationally. And we have reached the unanimous agreement amongst our group. And there's many people. We've had personal meetings in person as well as online as this meeting. And we've also sent out notices to people. And I've not heard one contrary voice amongst our many groups and people to the solution that we've reached. And that is that we would withdraw all objections if the terms that we reached of agreement with the city and with National Lutheran are incorporated as conditions of the approval by the Planning Commission of this project. And those documents have been submitted to you and to the city, some of them signed by Larry Bradshaw. So that's extremely important. One is the July 2nd commitment letter that you all have from him. Another one is a later one in July 14th that he mentioned about the construction phase as well as the post-construction phase where citizens would have access and input to the developers, contractors, as well as to the operators of the village at Providence Point to assure that all the environmental strictures are being met. And also you will see the traffic commitments in the July 2nd letter that should be incorporated. It's very comprehensive. The stormwater management plans that you have before you and in the commitments are essential and would be approved. They've been approved by the city. The conservation easement and the restrictive deed covenants are separate documents that you have that should be incorporated as conditions. And those all have been agreed to by the developer, by Alan Hyatt, their attorney, by the owner of the property. So to answer some of your questions, the most recent one on the easement and a restrictive deed covenants, 123 acres, the portion that's going to be continued to be owned by Janet Richardson Pearson, 123 acres would be in a permanent conservation easement that the Scenic River Lands Trust would hold. And they have been around for 30 years and have easements of over 3,000 acres in Anne Arundel County. They would be the enforcer of that easement. So the only thing that could be built, when you asked about the remaining forest on that part of the property, the only thing that could be built there are some barns and stables and equestrian related facilities that would total no more than 45,000 square feet, just a little bit over an acre in perpetuity. So there'd be agriculture ones and they could not clear any trees for those. The wellness house that Tom Smith mentioned would be hard against Forest Drive for cancer patients if the wellness house people chose to build it. And that would be with no trees taken down because there's no forest right there where they would build it. The only other any use of the forest would be to build trails either for horses or hiking, biking, and they would be limited to 6 feet wide and they would, if they took any tree down, they could only take trees under 3-inch DBH, and these would have to be replaced. And then the trails would have to be a porous surface, probably that recycled rubber tire type of trail. And the only other exception are some picnic pavilions for guests of Janet Richardson or future people there, or people that use the equestrian center. And those would also be able to clear trees up to 3 inches DBH, but would have to be replaced. So that would be 123.1 acres. The remaining acreage, which National Lutheran is purchasing at the northern end of the property, that would cover another 52.5 acres. And those 52.5 acres where the development would be of the village at Providence Point, all forest on there would be permanently protected without exemptions. There could be trails built there. And if trees were taken down, they would have to be approved by the Annapolis Environmental Commission and have to be replaced with the limits of 3 inches. And there could be picnic pavilions with the same restrictions. That is permanent, which means that 175.6 acres, other than the village at Providence Point and those exemptions, would remain untouched, except for picnic pavilions and the trails and the barns and stables I mentioned, or equestrian use things, and the wellness house. So those are in the conservation easement. Restrictive deed covenants are different. They would be enforced by the city or by any residents within a quarter mile or contingent to the property, or in the Hunt Meadows area, because that runs with the land. It would be filed with the deed. Everyone, we worked this out with the developers of Crystal Spring and with Alan Hyatt. And that is because a land trust will not take an easement on that type of developed property. And so the other issues that we had, beside extinguishing all development rights that you've heard, are on the forest conservation. The city enacted, during the pendency of this development, the toughest forest conservation law probably in the East, certainly in the Chesapeake Bay region, requiring 100% replacement of all trees that are taken down. And this is the first major project that this has occurred at in the city. So that, as has been mentioned, the 27.3 acres of forest to be cleared would be replanted 100% on site, including street trees. And there are very stringent requirements that Mr. Kobasco will testify to that have been cleared with Jim Urban, who is one of the best experts in this country on urban forestry, who has supported this plan, because of the questions that you asked would be answered about how these trees are maintained, what about the soil types. And I don't want to spend the limited time I have and take your time. You're going to learn about this, that assures that these trees will be watered and cared for, the root systems protected, that they will have the mulch from the trees that will be taken down and ground up placed upon them to help with that. And so that these trees would be protected in perpetuity. And as Alan Hyatt said, that's a long time, it's forever. So we think the forest conservation things are a model for developments anywhere in the state of Maryland, and we wish the state would adopt a similar law as the city did. The actual net effect, including the landscaping trees, will be a greater tree canopy ultimately than when we started with the project, so that 124 acres of forest existing on site will remain on site in perpetuity. And I have to stop. Can you all hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. The next thing is the 200-foot forested buffer around Forest Drive, which is very significant, both for visual as well as for the noise impact, as well as air pollution control. In addition, leaving this much forest and assuring it's protected is certainly a good carbon sink for minimizing the carbon footprint of the development, keeping this much forest. I can't think of a development of this size anywhere where you start with 124 acres, allow a development, any development to occur, and you wind up with 124 in perpetuity. So the other issue was a major one, was stormwater. Stormwater runoff is the major polluter of Crab Creek and of the South River. Crab Creek is one of the two most polluted little tributaries of the South River. It is the overwhelming source of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment impeding the water quality of Crab Creek. And two of the major sources are the channel, the stream channel under Spa Road that was mentioned, the 502 foot that will be rehabilitated that runs to Crab Creek. And another one runs along Crystal Spring Farm Road coming from Newtown 20. And with the revisions being done of Newtown 20 being torn down and rebuilt, they're going to take care of that channel. And this one's going to be taken care of, as Tom Smith mentioned, at a cost of about $500,000 that will greatly increase the water quality that's coming out of that stream channel for years, draining up 37 acres of land, including the Annapolis Junior High School, parts of Forest Drive and Spa Road running to Crab Creek. In addition, this stormwater system that's being installed will have over an acre of green roofs. 28 of the 30 cottages, single family and duplexes, will have porous parking surfaces. Most of the parking facilities parking areas will be underground. And in fact, for the parking of the 475 planned parking spaces, 280 are underground and another 68 are under buildings. And 60 spaces are connected to the 30 cottages with 56 using the porous driveways. That's incredible to have that much underground and not on the surface, causing more stormwater runoff as well as taking down more trees. The other thing is that on the stormwater, they're putting in many of those microbial retention cells. That's a fancy name for rain gardens. There would be about 79 of those where the water occurs. This is called environmental site design. And you can blur over when people say stormwater, but it's extremely important because of the pollution that it carries from the atmosphere, as well as from the incredible amount of traffic that flows, as well as just from the chemicals that may be dripping from cars, as well as any fertilizer that's used on the lawns. And so that will enable, and these things are about 5 foot deep, with not just mulch, but with highly absorbent soils and stones that slows the flow of water and allows it to percolate back into the groundwater. And so our goal, which we thought was almost impossible to achieve on a site like this with the intensive footprint, 15.2 acres of new impervious surface, our goal was always to handle a 20-year storm event, rain event, so that there would be no increase in rate, volume, or pollution load of the stormwater, and that the actual runoff that would occur after development would be that of a forest in good condition, so a natural condition. And so they've achieved this, and it wasn't easy. We worked through this for years, and we had a stormwater management expert who ranks with Jim Urban on forestry on stormwater, who actually worked on the Purple Line and the Intercounty Connector. He was the head of stormwater and sediment control. He worked for us, and we raised the money to pay him. And he has signed off on this and actually worked with JBA, the engineering firm, and the engineer that testified here to assure that we had the best stormwater systems that we could get. And we believe that if this system is maintained, which the city has a contractual agreements that runs with the deed, that this system has to be maintained, that you're seeing an excellent system that will actually handle a 25-year storm event. It's 125% of the state requirement, and it exceeds by far the state requirement of a 1 or 2 inch storm event. This would be about a 25-year storm event here, according to NOAA, is about 6.2 inches of rain falling in one storm event, which is a lot. And so that means it will be handled by these different systems. And the final one is we talked about the other environmental issues. The final thing is on the actual traffic, which is the issue that drove most people to their opposition of this project. And the traffic has been resolved with multiple avenues here. One is that the connector road that's been in the comprehensive plan for over 30 years now is going to be built. and it will run through the Crystal Spring property, through the village at Providence Point, through part of Janet Richardson's land, from Spa Road, as you saw, the Skipper Lane extended to the property where the Hogan Company owns, that there's a developer that's buying that land for lower cost apartment rentals. And that will run across that property and run across the American Legion and connect to Skipper Lane at Newtown Drive, so that people will not have to go out on Forest Drive, including the residents at the village at Providence Point, the workers there, as well as folks that live down Spa Road. And the road through National Lutheran is paying $181,000 to buy the right of way for the American Legion. They've already designed the road. The city had them design it. It's in the filings before you, if you can go through 1,000 pages of stuff, and you can see the design of the road. And the developer of the property adjoining the village at Providence Point has no access, ingress or egress anywhere out. They're going to dedicate the right of way to the city, and they will pay for their portion of that road. So after 30 some years talking about a connector road, which was supposed to run all the way to Harris T. Allen Boulevard, that's been dropped from the comprehensive plan. It's almost impossible with all the developments occurred. In addition, there are major improvements that are being made in the traffic for an extra turn lane on Spa Road coming into Forest Drive, turning left, or if you will, going west. And there are a whole list of others that there's not time to explain to. It is in the July 2nd document that has been filed with you from National Lutheran's former CEO, Larry Bradshaw, about a page and a half of traffic improvements, even working with the Annapolis middle school principal to assure that the timing of students and teacher arrivals is different than the timing of the workers coming at the village of Providence Point to minimize that traffic. And you heard Mr. Bradshaw testify that the previous 60-some rush hour traffics he believes have been reduced into the 30 range. So if we actually think that with all of these traffic improvements, and if you look at those, not enough time to speak tonight, but if you look at those traffic improvements and make those conditions of the approval of the project, you'll see that like us, we think there actually may result in a better traffic flow than currently exists. And finally, I want to point out that and thank National Lutheran for working with us almost on a daily basis for the last 2 years. Certainly, it seems like it's a daily basis. I still feel like I'm in Groundhog Day every day on this, and actually I'm into Groundhog Night tonight. Because I've been living with this, it'll be 9 years next month. And also want to thank the owner of the property for being good enough to protect so much of this property and continuing to work with us. And also Tom Smith, Planning and Zoning, and Mayor Buckley, who's stuck with us through thick and thin and really gave a nod to us and helped us all work this out to get to this point. And also to the other folks, all of the constituencies, like I used to represent in the Senate, I now represent. And I can say that unequivocally, our leadership group of 60 core people who are not very shy and who are all leaders in the community, as well as the thousands of other folks that we've sent this out to that have been contributors to our Crystal Spring Legal Defense Fund, I can say that I haven't heard one negative word about this agreement. Most people are very commendatory and think that we've actually worked a minor miracle, because we all realize, as you should, and as the city should, and any reasonable person should, that 176-acre property in the city of Annapolis at Forest Drive and Spa Road is not going to remain undeveloped for many years, and that this is likely, absent finding $25 million or more to purchase the land, which originally was the goal of most of us, was to actually protect the land in its entirety as a park. That has not proved possible. There's no political will. There's no will on the part of the owners of the property. And so it's been proven to be impossible. And so what we did is what the Congress of the United States cannot do, what our political parties can't do, and what people today in government seem unable to do. We were able to sit down, work collegially together, and reach this compromise. And my final words are that the folks that support this include the leaders of the Anne Arundel Sierra Club, the Southwestern Road Riverkeeper, the Severn Riverkeeper Program, the Annapolis Neck Peninsula Federation, the Annapolis Green with Elvia Thompson, the former director of the EPA and Maryland Smart Growth Program, who lives right down from the project off of Spa Road, the leader of the Spa Creek Conservancy, the founder of the Chesapeake Legal Alliance, the founder of the Growth Action Network, and former board members of the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and the former president of the Anne Arundel Bird Club, of which I'm a member, and she was also the president of the Maryland Ornithological Societies, and even Jane McWilliams, who lives in Bay Ridge, the Annapolis historian and author of the latest history of Annapolis, as well as Alderman Rob Savage, who you all know his strong environmental credentials, and he's chairman of the Council's Environmental Committee. And I understand the Annapolis Environmental Commission has also approved this. And finally, I would add that Paris Glendenning, former governor, who lives on the Annapolis Peninsula in the city limits in Chesapeake Harbor, also has endorsed this project. He's been with us since the start, and he's known as the father of smart growth. And so I would urge the Planning Commission to accept the conditions that we have put forth in the documents that I mentioned and that we've submitted, that they be made conditions of this development. That's essential. And in that case, we have agreed, and I can say unanimously, I know there's folks always that are going to oppose any development in this city, period, no matter if it moves one leaf off of a tree. But I can say that the people that I've worked with have unanimously endorsed us dropping our opposition if the Planning Commission would adopt these conditions that we've all agreed to, from the owner, Alan Hyatt, National Lutheran, the city of Annapolis. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.
I appreciate it. And Ms. Consoli, please enter into the record his address as a county resident. I'm not a city resident, but a representative of a organization that has many entities also attached with it. So he's speaking for a lot of people as a county resident. Thank you very much, Mr. Weingrad. Clearly care much about the South River, as we all do, in the creeks.
If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Okay, since public testimony is still open, and we do give time for commissioners to ask questions, it is 10:05. I won't ask any questions of them, but any other commissioners have questions of Mr. Weingrad at the moment before we get, and when you go to the Arctic, are you going to be back in 3 meetings from now or 2 meetings from now? What's your rough time of return if you survive?
I'm not getting back until sometime on the 20th, the last day, and it may be late at night, depending on the flights and the COVID conditions. You know, I mean, it's really uncertain. We're coming back from the tip of South America, so I'm not sure, but it'd probably be late.
20th of January?
I'm sorry?
20th of January?
Yeah, the last night of the hearings, and it may be very late that night.
All right.
If we make it to 20th.
Fair enough. Questions, Mr. Waldman, gang?
Yeah. First of all, Mr. Weingrad, thank you for your time. It's valuable, and it proved to be valuable. What are your thoughts on public access on those paths or through the conserved woods?
Well, you know, you've been at this too for a long time as a citizen, and I appreciate that, because you've sat through these meetings before and you always seem to read all the materials and ask the tough questions. So I remember when I testified at the work session, whether you call it testimony or not, you said, suppose you can acquire this land, then what would you support? And I kind of laid out the general plan. That was back a few years ago for what you're seeing now, but it was a good question. We had that thorough discussion. So the answer is this. On the properties, there's two sets of properties. One, the 52.5 acres that will be owned by National Lutheran, and there's 123.1 acres that will be owned by Janet Richardson. It is up to those owners of that private property as to who will use those paths or the trails.
Mhm.
And we talked about this, Tom Smith and I, because the mayor, the city, you, everyone wants to see people have that access moving around the peninsula and all, instead of just the highways, riding bikes. My brother-in-law rides his bike all the time around my community, goes back roads and all that I didn't even know existed, to be truthful, to find this way, because they live at the back of Quiet Waters Park. But what I'm getting to is, when we discuss this, I don't know how legally, I mean, it'd be difficult to
Mhm.
tell National Lutheran
Mhm.
that they must provide access to anyone that wants to go through their property through those trails. The road people can use, the road with the path, the bicycle path and the hiking, walking path they can use. The perimeter of the property, the 10-foot wide trail from all around Forest Drive and Spa Road, people can use, the public can use. Those are public rights of way, and it's a public right of way through the property, the Skipper Lane. But the other trails, it's really up to the owners. And I don't think, the question I would have, you're a lawyer, would understand this, is that what about the liability? If you open this to the public, Janet did for her trails, or they did at National Lutheran, what about if somebody falls down or slips on the trail, or something else happens to them, like on the B&A trail, people have been mugged, etc. What about the liability? And then how do they do about maintenance and injuries, etc.? So that's an issue that I can't really resolve and tell you, yes, they must allow people to use these trails, and they must build them so that anyone in the public can use them, because it's private property.
Well, I can answer one of your questions, which has to do with liability. The Maryland General Assembly passed something called the Recreational Use Statute. And what it does is, when a landowner provides their property free without cost for recreational or educational uses, the standard of liability drops from negligence to that owed to a trespasser, which is next to nothing. So that part is fairly easy to answer. If they were available without charging a fee, which of course they probably wouldn't, they would only owe a trespasser standard of care. But as to who would maintain them and so forth and so on, and how people would respond if somebody's in trouble, those are different questions. But I can't answer the liability question, and that has been passed along to the inestimable Mr. Hyatt. He knows of the recreational use statute because I gave it to him 2 years ago. But it's a very interesting statute, and it should be, all of the marina owners and so forth who are being asked to provide public access along the waterfronts, they also can take advantage of it.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Walben, right now, Crystal Spring Farm Road is a private road.
Yes.
Mascate Farm Road is a private road. Legally, unless you're a guest of someone there, there's no access at all to that public access to the property. The only thing you can access are the wedge that Alan Hyatt's folks, his interest and all that he represents, own, that about a 10.5, 11 acre wedge there where the office building is and the old house.
Right.
That's the office building is the only public access, and that's going to be torn down. So we're not losing anything, but I know that is up to the owners of the property, and I don't know whether the city would do well to force people to do that. I know that the trails, because of the taking down trees or the invasion of natural lands, the trails will be limited to 6 feet wide, and they have to be porous. There's a new type. If
Right.
you all are aware of that, the rubber tires that you use. And one other point I just wanted to answer about the width of Skipper Lane. The one thing I would tell you is that I live in a community where we have 20-foot wide roads, and we don't have off-street parking. There is a problem here with fire trucks and safety vehicles all the time. If one person has their car out in the driveway, or if there's a delivery truck for people that still get fuel oil or propane, or there's a delivery truck for Amazon and a fire happened to guys down the street or something, we're in trouble here. And my surmise is the reason it's that wide, you're in a senior living facility with maybe 500 seniors ultimately. You're going to want to get quick access from ambulances or fire engines and rescue vehicles in such a property. I suspected it's because of that, because I was thinking in my own community, we had a major fire here. And it was really frightening. I could see the flames shooting 50 feet up in the air. And we had problems because of the width of these roads here with the fire trucks and all.
Okay. By the way, just in closing, and thank you very much, what I'm sensing and seeing here tonight is something, as you said, we don't often get, which is people talking to each other and actually resolving issues that come up. This should be replicated, as you said, on the state level, national level, all over the place.
Well, people have
I
actually,
commend you and everybody else who sat down to be able to present to us what you've done.
well,
Thanks.
I appreciate that. And, Anastasia Hopkinson, who's been an opponent of a lot of the developments and many times rightfully so, she has been urging me to write a book about this. And I've already spent enough time. When this is done, I don't want to hear any more about it. I don't want to be I could be a spokesperson for working things out and doing things together, but we were so far apart on this. Our name that we really went by, and we still have our website with this name, is Stop Crystal Spring. And that website is still up. But what's frustrating with something like this, there's always going to be naysayers, and you're going to, I'd be surprised, you're going to hear some opposition and people that are going to oppose this, but I don't think in the future we can do any better with a 176 acre piece of property than what we're doing with this. And I really appreciate your insight, because I think it really is a model. I don't know how in the future we're going to do better. Just think about this as Annapolis grows in this area, grows in the demands for open space and the demands for housing and development. This property is going one way, and that is it's going to go up in value over the future.
Well, have a great trip.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Just something to point out, Mr. Tom Smith, the roads, Mr. Weingrad referred to them as private. I believe they're going to be over to public ownership, correct? I just want to point that out.
Yes, the roads will all be public ownership. That's part of the deal in the city development. So that'll be Skipper Lane
Gotcha.
all the way.
You had mentioned before that they're private and they were going to be private, but no, that wouldn't be the case. So.
Well, it's a
No,
mix.
the roads.
Skipper,
We're talking about the
Skipper's Lane
trails.
Skipper's Lane is public, but the loop roads are private, just
Right.
per the prior discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just one last thing about the public or private access to, say, hiking trails. I just bring to your attention the deed of conservation easement that's in our package. That does address that on page 4, and you can go read it yourself. But it's in section 6, someplace Exhibit B. You can go read it, and it has some language about what can and can't be done based on the deed easement with Scenic Rivers Land Trust.
And what you guys have said, I'm really kind of shocked based on the testimony 3 years ago and prior, maybe 5 years ago, that there isn't some kind of agreement to get trails or usage, because there was a big push by the public testimony we had back then to be able to walk through a forest. And I know you can't get the 25 million to turn into a park, but one would have thought there would have been some kind of element that you could have gotten to. And I guess it just wasn't going to happen, Mr. Weingrad?
Well, there's the 10-foot trail all around the property from Forest Drive to Spa Road, which is a pretty long trail for bikes and walking or hiking. So we talked about this, and I've talked to Larry Bradshaw specifically about the trail issue. Tom Smith and the city, and particularly the mayor, who's a bicyclist too, was pushing this. So in their property, Larry, who was amenable on everything, said, we may put trails there but he did not see how that he would open them up to the public. Now, I don't want to speak for him, and you can ask him this later or the people that represent him, but that's what I heard. And so I didn't want to take on another battle where it's private property and we're telling him not only does he have to build trails, maintain them, and no matter what the liability is, whether even if it's under the less liability that you owe a trespasser, that he was going to have to do that, especially with a bunch of seniors, some of them may be in wheelchairs using the trails that he wants to prioritize. On Janet's property, I never approached Janet or Alan Hyatt representing her to say, does Janet want to open up her private property to trails on her property, because I thought it was a non-starter, and we were already asking so much about extinguishing certain other activities, including a farmer's market or a sale with a large barn and all the parking to go with that on her property. We had a how would I say, a rapprochement on that one, that we're originally there was language that might have allowed a farmer's market with all the traffic, which would have driven people crazy that are worried about more traffic. So because there weren't any limits on it. So we were able to extinguish that type of personal retail sales on the property, because one of the big changes in this that really hasn't been mentioned much tonight is that all retail on the site, all 175.6 has been eliminated. And that's a major change from what was originally proposed. There was going to be a shopping center, a bank, a food store, a hotel. There was going to be major retail. The only retail is within the senior living building itself. When people want to buy toothpaste or shaving cream or some of the seniors, that it would only be open for the seniors that live there or the workers. And so that is a major step. So I would say too that it was just really going to be too much of a lift in the face of the owners of the property to say, now you have to build trails and them open up to the public.
Okay. And I wasn't thinking the owners, the Masqué Farm property. I was more so thinking to the west, that big chunk of forest that would be coming off of Crystal Spring Farm Road. That's the one.
Well, that would be, part of that is going to be owned by National Lutheran, but part of that is still going to be retained by Janet Richardson. So when you put the map up there, it's kind of hard. There is a drawing that you all ought to look at because of your interest and your questioning that would show you the property lines for National Lutheran and where the deed restrictions, they're called deed covenants, restrictive deed covenants would be, and then it'll show you where the conservation easement is of the 123 acres. Actually, in some of the filings, it's in purple. It's a purple line. So it isn't just the area where the equestrian center is, where you don't see many trees. There's a lot of trees, and it goes into the meadow area and it goes up around. It's hard to describe without having a map to show you, but you all ought to see that. I'm sure Tom Smith can show you that, or someone with National Lutheran.
Crystal Spring Farm Road stays, obviously, for access all the way down here, correct?
Right. I mean, not all of Crystal Spring Farm Road is improved. Only the part that runs down through the National Lutheran development, and that's an important point. So the edge of it that runs all the way down to Crab Creek, that other part isn't going to be improved. So just that one part's improved, and then National Lutheran would own that, and they own that land all the way up against the property next door, close to Newtown 20, but where the Hogan Company's property is at 1710 Forest Drive. But she owns property right adjoining that in the meadow that's going to be reforested too, where it's open space there. So it kind of winds around, besides the equestrian center and the land running all the way down Forest Drive where the wellness house will be. So you really need that delineation on a map that I can't show you. It'll really clear it up for you exactly where her 123.1 acres is going to be and where National Lutheran's is going to be.
Well, I thought for sure by this presentation, we would have seen some kind of little park area or area to walk for people in here, but understood.
Yeah, well, the equestrian center has trails too, and even for horse trails. And I'm sure in the future, I mean, Janet Richardson is free to sell this property or leave it to someone else at any time. And so I'm sure in the future, there's going to be more talk about the trails and that type of use because it is permitted. There are 6-foot trails permitted. And it would be I'm not saying I'm not adverse to that. We're not. It was just another layer. It's permitted, but to require that was just a stretch with on private property to start pushing that on the owners. That's how I feel anyway. I mean, it just wasn't something that we felt rose to that height, that level that we should push when we got all these other concessions.
Gotcha. Thank you very much, Mr. Weinrad. Any other comments from the commissioners? Questions?
Thanks.
Mr. Hyde, anything for Mr. Weinrad?
Nope. Thank you, Mr.
I would just like
Weinrad.
to thank Senator Weingrad for all his work, and I just commend you because it's project's a lot better because of you. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for all your efforts too. And please, all those conditions are critical for our dropping the opposition. That there's a list of the things there, and I've submitted a written statement that has all of those documents, and I could put the dates there too, that those conditions are really critical in perpetuity, that there's no slipping on this, because one of the key features that our group and many of these people pounded me for this, and that's why negotiating, which Larry Bradshaw referred to for years on the terms of the conservation easement, and then with him and his lawyer for less time, but on the restrictive deed covenants, I had to swear to these people that if we dropped our opposition, there would be no sucker punching, that there would be no sandbagging like in a poker game, that they would come back in the future, not these people, but in the future, whether it's 5 years or 25 years, and start piece by piece developing other parcels of this 175.6 acres, including taking down the forest, because they would exempt out through the city council or through planning and zoning these lands for further development. And so the adoption of those terms of the conservation easement and of the restrictive deed covenants are critical, as well as those traffic and the stormwater and the forest conservation issues are critical. And one last minute of your time, very quickly, because of the fiasco in the city about the sediment and stormwater control and the damage to water quality at the Parkside Preserve that became somewhat infamous. Our folks, one of the feedback was, well, it all looks good on paper, but what about when it starts to be developed, and can we count on the city to enforce and the developers to stick to the sediment control and stormwater and forest conservation issues? Larry Bradshaw was good enough to work with me and with his attorney to develop another document. The most recent one was July 14th. Was submitted to Sally Nash, that commits, as he mentioned quickly, and this might have gone by you all, that during the construction phase, that they would strictly adhere to and exceed all city and state requirements for sediment and stormwater control and for the protection of the forest as agreed to. And they would meet periodically with representatives of our group and other citizen leaders near the site to go over any concerns that were had, and that we would have the personal email and the personal cell phone of the construction manager. And after construction, that we would do the same and have the same email and phone number, the personal one of the manager of the village at Providence Point, with mandatory periodic meetings to make sure all of the strictures concerning stormwater, forest conservation, and the traffic, as well as the deed and restrictive deed covenants, the conservation easement, they would be adhered to, and those meetings would occur on site. So that document is there, and that ought to be a condition too, because there were concerns in the community after they were reading about and hearing about, or actually calling me or writing me to do something about Parkside Preserve.
That document, at least in my short time on the commission, is unprecedented, and I suspect for those that have been around a lot longer than I have, it's unprecedented in their tenures also. And I was very impressed to see that.
I would say, really, if I had
a
the
lot.
time and the wherewithal, this would be a good land use manual of an example of a win-win project. Not just the solutions that we reached, not just the end results, but also of how we achieved this, and it wasn't easy. It just didn't happen because a light bulb went off in somebody's brain. It was because of the incredible pent-up resistance of the community of residents of Annapolis and the Annapolis Neck Peninsula that were just fed up with the incessant development, what they saw as haphazard, and the destruction of the natural resources, the natural areas, but mainly because of the traffic. It's hard to ride on Forest Drive in any week, and I'm at the end of the peninsula without a major traffic accident. And I've seen cars on fire. It's taken us an hour and a half to 2 hours to get home some days. I just saw another one. I went to work out yesterday, and there was another accident, a very serious accident that just occurred on Forest Drive. And so it was that pent up resistance, and that's why we were able to harness those feelings and work out a productive outcome by just sheer diligence and perseverance with many people, including my co-partner, David Proston, who's now retired and living elsewhere, unfortunately. So it's been a real slug, and I appreciate what you've all said and what you realize in this, because some of these documents are unprecedented. You just don't see things like this in development fights.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Weingrad, and commissioners, thank you for your time. Public testimony will now be closed, and we will go back to presentation mode, but being the fact that it is 10:30 at night almost, we are going to end at this point, Mr. Hyatt, and then have you continue on at the next meeting. So make a marker where you are and what you need to get to, but I believe this ends your section for, I get his name right, Mr. Johnson, and
Right.
we've gotten through him, the staff, and the commissioners asking him questions, and we can move on to the next one when we come back, Mr. Hyatt. So
We'll be prepared to do that. Thank you. I think it's a
thank
good,
you very
good
much.
starting point.
And seemingly you have satisfied the Annapolis Neck and the traffic issue. So amazing. You've done the impossible so far without the other public testimony. All right, commissioners, we're going to continue this item and this till the next meeting. You have any issue with that, commissioners, before we do that? Move on the agenda. All right, thank you. Now miscellaneous items for the commission. Is there anything we need to cover out in the meeting rather than we can cover administratively on the side? I don't believe there is.
No.
All right, wonderful. And our next meeting will be virtually as well. So we will continue this item till then. Mr. Beard, any issues legally at the moment or any items? No, gotcha. Thank you. Staff, anything to add?
January the 6th.
That's correct, Commissioner Walden. January the 6th, we will continue.
That's a wonderful, nice little break. And we'll look forward to it. Okay, anything else from staff?
No, sir, not at this time.
It's amazing. Jackie didn't chime in. Okay, wonderful. Mr. Hyatt, thank you again.
All right, thank you.
Everyone else.
Happy holidays to all. We'll see you January 6th.
Thank you for your professionalism. Really.
Thank you.
Not common. Not common. All right. All right, everyone, that's it. We'll go ahead and close out the meeting. I now will motion to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And Mr. Wall.